Release her. The voice came from behind the bar, quiet, flat, no tremor in it at all. Gavin Locke turned with a grin already forming on his face, still gripping Rachel's wrist, still expecting to see some frightened barman with shaking hands. He saw Logan Rourke setting a glass on the counter with the patience of a man who had already decided how this would end. And then one of Gavin's men stopped breathing because he'd seen the tattoo. Before the story is over, you are going to understand why 4 armed gangsters walked out of that roadhouse without a single word of argument, and why the man behind the bar had spent 3 years trying to make sure a moment like that never came. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now. Stay with me until the final word and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The Last Lantern Roadhouse did not advertise itself. It sat beside Highway 89 in northern Arizona, the way an old fence post sits beside a dirt road. Not because anyone planned it there, but because no one had ever bothered to move it. The building was low and wide, stucco gone pale from 30 summers of hard sun, a hand-painted sign above the entrance that Walter Briggs had repainted twice in 40 years and still couldn't get quite level. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and fried onions, and something underneath both of those things, something older, the smell of a place that had absorbed the lives of everyone who had ever sat in one of its vinyl booths and decided to say what was really on their mind. Logan Rourke had been here for nearly 3 years. He arrived in late October with a duffel bag and a canvas jacket worn thin at the shoulders, asked Walter for a shift, and turned out to be the most competent person Walter had hired in a decade. He didn't complain about hours. He didn't ask for advances. He kept the taps clean, remembered what every regular drank before they opened their mouths, and had a talent that Walter could only describe as a kind of weather sense. He knew when the atmosphere inside the room was about to change before anything visible had changed. He'd be wiping the bar down, and then he'd go still for just a second. And 30 seconds later, a fight would start in the corner, or someone would knock a table over, or a man would stand up too fast and go pale. Logan would already be moving by then, already positioned, already thinking 2 moves ahead. Walter didn't ask about his past. You don't ask those kinds of questions at the Last Lantern. Oh, people come to Highway 89 because they are going somewhere or because they are done going somewhere. Logan had the look of a man who was done. His hair was sandy blonde going silver at the temples. He had a face that wasn't exactly handsome, but was deeply specific, a face that had been tested and had come through and knew it. There were scars along his jaw and across the back of his left hand that he never explained. He kept his sleeves rolled to the forearm in warm weather, which was almost always, and he wore a plain work shirt and dark jeans and boots. He resoled himself in the small room behind the kitchen where he slept on a narrow cot beneath a single window. He had exactly 3 photographs pinned above that cot. Nobody at the Roadhouse had ever seen them up close. Rachel Briggs had tried once, years back, when she was bringing him a late dinner plate. She'd gotten as far as the doorway before she saw his expression and decided the photographs could stay private. Rachel was Walter's granddaughter. She'd come out from Flagstaff 2 years ago to help with the Roadhouse's books after her grandmother passed, intending to stay 6 months and settling into something that felt too necessary to leave. She was in her early 30s, quiet the way intelligent people get quiet when they're absorbing more than they're saying. And she drove to an evening accounting class in Prescott every Thursday in a truck that needed a new muffler, but never quite got one because money was always going somewhere more urgent. The Roadhouse was Walter's entire life. He'd built it with his wife before the highway was even fully paved. He knew every crack in the plaster and every name on the old receipts and every family in the county who'd celebrated something important in one of his booths. He was 73, moved slow from a hip replacement 3 winters ago, and had the particular stubbornness of a man who had outlasted several things that were supposed to outlast him. The first time Gavin Locke came through the door, Walter recognized the type immediately. Not the specifics, not the name or the organization, just the type. He'd seen it before, men who moved into spaces that didn't belong to them and arranged their faces as if the intrusion were perfectly natural. Gavin was somewhere north of 40, well-built, with a neat beard and a collared shirt that was trying to look respectable and almost managing it. He had two men with him that first visit. He sat at the bar, ordered a whiskey he didn't drink, and explained to Walter what a monthly security arrangement would look like. "I want you to hear me clearly," Gavin said, his voice pleasant, unhurried. "There's some uncertainty out here on the highway. Businesses like yours, isolated, limited staff, they're exposed. You have a daughter working nights, granddaughter," Walter said. "A granddaughter working nights, handling your money, leaving late." Gavin paused to let that breathe. "My employer provides protection services for establishments in this corridor. It's not a large expense, and the peace of mind is significant." Logan was at the other end of the bar, listening without appearing to listen, his back half turned as he restocked the low shelf beneath the register. Walter told Gavin he'd think about it. "Don't think too long," Gavin said, and smiled and left. Walter told Logan about it afterward. Logan was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "Did he give you a name?" He said his employer. That was all. Logan nodded slowly. "Don't pay it. That was already my plan. I know. I'm just confirming mine." 3 weeks passed. The Roadhouse had a good October Bluegrass Festival, 3 towns over, brought traffic through for 2 solid weekends, and Rachel had finished reconciling the third quarter books and found that they were barely ahead of where they'd been the year before. Walter let himself feel something close to optimism. Gavin came back on a Tuesday. This time there were 4 of them, and this time there was no pretense of a pleasant conversation. They walked in during the late dinner hour when the Roadhouse was still half full, families and truckers and a table of highway workers finishing their shift. Gavin moved straight to the end of the bar where Walter was standing and did not lower his voice. "I'm going to need your answer tonight," he said. "You already have my answer," Walter said. Gavin's expression didn't change. He reached across the bar and picked up Walter's collection jar. The ceramic rooster Rachel had painted as a teenager, where Walter kept his tip money, and set it on the floor and crushed it under his heel. A piece of it skittered under a bar stool. The whole room went quiet. "That was your first answer," Gavin said. "I'm here for your second one." Walter squared his shoulders. 73 years old, with a bad hip, and not a trace of backing down in his posture. "Same answer. Get out of my establishment." One of the men with Gavin moved. He grabbed Walter by the front of his shirt and yanked him sideways, and Walter went down hard against the edge of the bar before hitting the floor, and the sound of an old man's body hitting the ground cut through the room like something breaking. Rachel came out of the back office running. She was already reaching for the telephone mounted on the wall beside the kitchen door when the second man got there first, grabbed her wrist, wrenched the phone from her hand, and held her arm twisted up behind her back. She made a short, tight sound of pain and stopped moving. "Call the sheriff," Gavin said, pleasantly, to the room at large. "Go ahead. We'll still be here when he arrives. And so will you." The room stayed frozen. Gavin turned back to Walter, who was trying to get up off the floor, and said, "What you owe for the past 3 weeks of unprotected business is release her." It came from behind the bar. Not shouted, not strained, just spoken, in a register that filled the room the way a sound fills a room when everything else has gone completely silent. Logan Rourke set a glass on the counter, unhurried. The way you'd set a glass down if you had nowhere you needed to be and nothing you were afraid of. He was looking at Gavin. Gavin turned with the grin already forming, still holding the situation in his head as a situation he controlled. And then he registered Logan, just a barman, sandy hair, work shirt, neither imposing nor particularly large, and the grin finished forming and he spread his hands. "And who exactly are you?" Logan didn't answer that. He kept his eyes on the man holding Rachel. "Let her go," he said. "Don't make me say it a third time." The man with Rachel glanced at Gavin. Gavin shook his head slightly, still smiling. "Friend, I don't think you understand who you're talking to." "I understand exactly who I'm talking to," Logan said. "I'm talking to 4 men who are going to walk out of here in the next 60 seconds. And that was when the fourth man, the one who had stayed near the entrance, the one who hadn't said a word since they came in, took a step forward and stopped moving. His name was Curtis, and he had spent 11 years moving in circles where certain reputations were not stories but facts, and he had just seen something he was not prepared to see. Logan had reached across the bar for a towel, and in doing so, his sleeve had ridden up past his forearm, and Curtis was staring at the inside of Logan's left wrist like a man who has just seen a landmine in the floor he was about to step on. The tattoo was not elaborate. A compass rose with wings extending from either side, detailed and darkened with age, the kind of work that was done a long time ago by someone who knew exactly what they were making permanent. Below it, so faded it was barely legible, the single word, North Star. Curtis, said Gavin. His voice had changed entirely. Gavin registered the change. He looked at Curtis. What? Gavin, Curtis said it again. And then he said nothing else, just tilted his head toward Logan. And Gavin followed his gaze to the tattoo. And Gavin's smile did something complicated and then stopped existing. Logan pulled his sleeve back down. He reached under the bar and produced a telephone. Not the wall-mounted one, his own, and set it beside the glass. He looked at Gavin. I said 60 seconds, Logan said. That's now closer to 40. There are things that travel through certain communities the way weather travels. You can't see the mechanism, but you can feel the pressure changing. In biker circles across the American Southwest, there was a story, more than a story, a name that had been passed around for over 2 decades, through bunkhouses and fuel stops and the long stretches of desert highway, where one rider might tell another about something they'd witnessed or heard from someone who'd been there. North Star Rourke, the road captain who rode out into situations that other people had already written off. The man whose gift, if you could call it that, was not violence, though he was capable of it, but de-escalation at the edge of violence, the ability to stand between two groups of men who were absolutely certain they were going to destroy each other and make them both uncertain enough to stop. He'd ridden into an armed standoff in New Mexico in 2004 and come back with 4 men who should by every reasonable account have been dead. He'd walked into a roadside confrontation in Nevada that the county sheriff had declared too dangerous to approach and ended it without a single person going to the hospital. He was not a myth. Myths are things that can't be verified. There were living men in 3 states who could tell you exactly where they had been standing when they saw North Rourke do something that shouldn't have been possible. And then, 8 years ago, he had simply not been there anymore. Curtis knew the name. Curtis had, in fact, once met a man who had once ridden behind North Star on a run along the California border, and that man had described what it was like in terms that did not make it sound like riding behind just another road captain. And Curtis was standing in a roadhouse in northern Arizona looking at the tattoo that was, by the account of everyone who knew anything, unique, the compass and wings mark that North Star Rourke had designed himself and that no one else in the Hells Angels had ever worn. There are moments when your entire understanding of a situation reorganizes itself in a single second, when everything you thought you had arranged in a certain order suddenly shows you it was arranged in a completely different order, and you just hadn't been seeing it clearly. This was that moment for Curtis. And Curtis, whatever else he was not a man who refused to update his thinking when the evidence required it. Gavin, he said, for the 3rd time, and this time he said it quietly and stepped close enough to say the rest of it directly into Gavin's ear. Gavin listened. The blood did something in his face that was not quite leaving, but was something adjacent to it. He looked at Logan. Logan was looking back at him. Nothing in Logan's posture had changed. He still looked like a bartender who had asked someone to take their conversation outside and was now simply waiting to see whether that request was going to be respected. You're going to stand there, Gavin said slowly, and tell me that I'm not going to tell you anything, Logan said. I've already told you everything you need. You have about 20 seconds. The man holding Rachel looked at Gavin. Gavin made a small, tight gesture with 2 fingers. The man released Rachel's wrist. Rachel took 2 fast steps away from him and reached automatically for the wall telephone before remembering it had been thrown on the floor. Smart, Logan said, looking at Gavin. Walk out. Gavin straightened his collar. His eyes on Logan were doing something that was not backing down. Not entirely. The pride was still visible. The fury was still visible. But they were operating inside a container of recalculation that kept them from going anywhere dangerous. He said, very quietly, "You should have stayed wherever you were hiding." "Probably," Logan said, "because now I know where you are." "I know you do," Logan said. "Take your men. Go." Gavin went. He went the way a man goes when he's made a tactical decision that he's already framing to himself as a strategic pause, not a retreat, a pause before the next move. Curtis went last, and he paused in the doorway and looked back at Logan for just a moment. A look that was not threat and not respect, but some alloy of the two that didn't quite have a name. And then he was gone. The room held its breath for 4 full seconds. Then a trucker in the far booth exhaled loudly, and a woman at the counter asked if anyone knew what had just happened. And Walter put both hands on the bar and got himself upright from the floor with the careful, furious dignity of a man who does not require assistance and is going to make absolutely certain everyone knows it. Rachel appeared at Logan's elbow from the other side of the bar. She looked at the space where Gavin had been standing. Then she looked at Logan. "Are you going to tell me what that tattoo means?" she said. "No," Logan said. "Are you going to tell Walter?" Logan looked at Walter, who was now upright, smoothing the front of his shirt with both hands, looking at the door the men had just walked through with the expression of a person who is currently converting shock into something more productive and useful. "Not tonight," Logan said. "When?" Logan picked up the glass he'd set on the bar. He looked at it for a moment. The fingerprints on it, the slight distortion of the light through the glass. Then he set it down again and picked up the towel and began to wipe the bar in slow, deliberate strokes, the way he did when he was thinking. "When I've figured out how much they need to know," he said. "Logan." Rachel's voice had something in it that was not patience. "That man said he knew where you were now." "What does that mean?" "It means," Logan said, without stopping the slow wipe, "that tonight was not the end of anything. It was a beginning." "A beginning of what?" He looked at her then. And there was something in his expression that was not quite the calm face she'd been looking at for 3 years. Not quite the reserved smile and the uncanny weather sense. There was something older than those things underneath. Something worn in rather than put on. The face of a man who had learned a very particular lesson and was now recognizing the first signs of a test he'd hoped was behind him. "Of the part," he said, "where we have to decide how we're going to handle this." Walter sent the remaining customers home with their meals comped and their drinks on the house. And when the last truck had pulled out of the parking lot and the lights on the highway sign had been cut, the 3 of them sat at the bar, Walter on a stool with an ice pack Rachel had found against his ribs. Rachel with her bookkeeping ledger open, but not being looked at. Logan with both hands flat on the bar in front of him. "His name is Gavin Locke," Walter said. "I found that out after the first visit. The man he works for is called Marano. Carlo Marano. He's been operating along this highway corridor for about 1.5 years. "You knew who he was?" Rachel said. "I made some calls after the first visit. I wasn't going to be surprised a second time." "What kind of operation?" Logan said. "Protection on the surface. Underneath." Walter shook his head. "I talked to Dave Harmon over at the Pineview Diner. He's been paying Marano's people for 4 months. Said if he misses a week, they inventory his stock. That means they walk through his kitchen and his storage, and they know exactly what he has and what it's worth and what kind of inspection it might or might not pass. It's not just money they're after. They're working their way into these businesses, getting their hooks into the operations themselves." "For what purpose?" Rachel said. "Dave thinks staging," Walter said. "He thinks Marano wants to use these places. The highway corridor. Isolated businesses with loading areas and storage. He thinks Marano's moving stolen cargo, and he needs places to hold it that don't look like what they are." Logan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How many businesses?" "That I know of? 6. Dave thinks the real number is closer to 12. "All along 89? From Sedona to the Utah line, more or less." Logan's hands didn't move from the bar, But something in his posture adjusted, a slight, almost invisible change in the set of his shoulders, like a person who has just received information they were already partly expecting and are now integrating with the rest of what they know. How long before the next visit? That's what I don't know. Soon, Logan said. Tonight moved things. Gavin lost face in a room full of witnesses. That's going to have consequences. What kind of consequences? The kind that come faster than you expect. Logan finally reached beneath the bar for a glass and filled it from the tap and set it in front of Walter. Drink that. Your hands are still shaking, and you don't need them to be. Walter looked at his hands. They were, in fact, trembling slightly at the knuckles. He picked up the glass and drank from it and set it down and said, Logan, I need to know what we're dealing with here. Not the man Gavin works for, the man behind my bar. The silence that followed was not a refusal. It was the specific silence of someone deciding how much weight to put on a sentence before they speak it. My name is Logan Rourke, Logan said. I've told you that. Everything else I've told you is also true. I spent 3 years in the Army before I was 20. 2 tours that were not what I thought they'd be. I came out of them different than I went in. The tattoo, Walter said. The tattoo is from after the Army. A long time after. Logan turned his forearm up on the bar without making a theatrical display of it. Just turned it up, let them see what was there. The compass rose with the wings. The faded word, beneath. I rode with the Hells Angels for more than 20 years. Road captain for most of it. Rachel sat with that for a moment. And the name? The name that man recognized? North Star. It's what they called me. Logan turned his arm back down. Because of what I did. Which wasn't what most people would assume. What did you do? Walter asked. I brought people back, Logan said simply. From situations that had gone wrong. Not wars, not military, riders. Family sometimes. People caught in something too large for them. I had a particular, he paused, choosing the word carefully, fussicility, for walking into the middle of something dangerous and making everyone present understand that they didn't actually want the outcome they were headed toward. Rachel said, slowly, that's why the men tonight, when that one saw your yes, they left, Logan said. Yes, not because they were afraid of a fight. Because the name means something specific to certain people. It means he stopped again. It means that the situation is more complicated than it appeared to be. Walter said, why did you leave? The pause that came after that was different from the other pauses. Denser, like something with actual weight. A man died, Logan said. Someone I rode with for 12 years. His name was Danny, and the circumstances of his death there was a confrontation on a highway outside Albuquerque. A situation that I had been trying to resolve for 3 days. I thought I had it under control. He stopped. I didn't have it under control. And Danny went in while I was still negotiating, and by the time I understood what was happening, his voice didn't break. It did something more controlled and, therefore, more painful than breaking. It simply paused, like a clock that has stopped for a second. By the time I understood what was happening, the understanding was too late to help. The roadhouse was entirely quiet. Outside, the highway was empty, just the occasional distant truck engine going somewhere that had nothing to do with any of this. So I left, Logan said, and I came here. And I have spent 3 years trying to be useful without being, he gestured at himself, at the tattoo, at the space where the 4 men had stood, without being that, Walter said. And tonight, Logan said, that is no longer entirely possible. He slept badly, which he expected. He lay on the narrow cot with his forearm over his eyes and went through the sequence of the evening. Not obsessively, not the way he'd have done it years ago, replaying every variable in search of the error, but methodically, the way you take inventory of a tool you need to know the condition of before you use it. He thought about Gavin's face when he recognized the tattoo. Not the fear, he hadn't expected fear exactly, and what he'd seen wasn't precisely that. It was recalculation. The face of a man who had entered a room with a certain map and discovered the map was wrong, and who was now deciding how to adjust. Gavin was going to go back to Morano with new information. And Morano, whoever he was, however he thought, was going to have to make a decision about what to do with that information. Logan had been in that position many times on the other side of it. He knew what the options looked like from that vantage point. The options were withdraw and find easier territory, which a man like Morano almost certainly would not do, or escalate in a way that couldn't be matched, which was the response that worried Logan, because escalation in that direction meant going directly at the things Logan cared about protecting. And Logan had spent enough years reading the decision-making of men like Gavin's employer to know that the escalation was not an if. It was a when. He turned on the cot. Through the single window, the highway was visible, a long dark ribbon edged with the silver of distant poles. He'd looked at that window for 3 years and found it consistently sufficient. Just that. The highway, the desert, the light in the early mornings that came up slowly and turned everything the color of old copper, and the sound of trucks going somewhere that had nothing to do with him. He thought of Danny. He thought, as he did most nights, of standing on a highway outside Albuquerque in the particular clarity that comes after something has gone irreversibly wrong, when the noise has stopped and there is only the aftermath, and understanding that he had miscalculated by a fraction of a judgment call, a fraction of a decision about timing that had cost his closest friend everything. He had left the road after that, not because the Hells Angels asked him to, not because he'd done anything wrong in any legal or organizational sense, but because he had made a judgment that turned out to be wrong. And the cost of that wrongness was not something he was willing to continue running at the same scale. He had come to Arizona to be small, to do work that needed doing, to be useful in ways that didn't require him to be North Star. He turned again on the cot. He thought about Rachel, and the look on her face when the man twisted her arm back, and the short, tight sound she made before she stopped fighting, the controlled, intelligent decision to stop fighting, because fighting was only going to make the physical damage worse. He thought about Walter trying to stand with his bad hip and his old man's pride intact, refusing assistance from the floor. He thought about the 12 businesses Walter had described. The families along Highway 89, the ordinary people who'd built something and were now watching it be dismantled by a man who had identified their isolation as a tool. He did not sleep until close to 4 a.m. When he did, he dreamed of an open highway and a man named Danny riding ahead of him, turning once to check that Logan was still there, and then turning back to face the road. He was still there. He was still there. The delivery arrived the following morning while Logan was opening up. It was a cardboard box, no shipping label, left on the back step between 3 a.m. and 6. Logan found it when he went out to bring in the produce delivery. He stood and looked at it for a moment before he touched it, reading the outside of it the way he'd learned to read containers that didn't announce themselves. He brought it inside and called Walter and Rachel. Inside, 3 whiskey bottles, empty, smashed into pieces, and then reassembled loosely in the box so they rattled when he lifted it. A leather-bound ledger that Walter recognized immediately, one of 3 backup account books kept in the office filing cabinet. The pages burned away to the binding. And a photograph. The photograph was of Rachel. She was on the sidewalk outside her accounting class building in Prescott. A Thursday evening 5 days ago, her truck keys in one hand and her bag in the other. The shot was taken from across the street, from an angle that suggested a parked car. She was not looking at the camera. She had no idea anyone was there. Rachel looked at the photograph for a very long time. Then she put it face down on the bar without saying anything. Walter said, "They've been watching us." "Longer than we knew," Logan said. "The ledger from the filing cabinet means they've been inside the building. The photograph means they've been following Rachel's movements, possibly for weeks." Walter's jaw tightened. "When you said tonight was the beginning..." "Yes, Logan!" Walter looked at him. "I need to know what you're going to do." Logan looked at the box. He looked at the burned ledger and the shattered bottles and the photograph lying face down on the bar. And something settled in him. Not anger exactly, not the old fire of a man preparing for the version of this situation that involved road noise and speed and the particular clarity of open conflict. Something steadier than that. Something that had been earned through a longer and more difficult education. I'm going to do this right, he said, which means I'm not going to do it the fast way. He reached under the bar for his phone. He held it for a moment, looking at the screen. Then he made a call he had not made in 8 years. It rang 3 times. Logan Rourke, said the voice on the other end. Not a question, an identification. A recognition that carried 8 years of silence in it and somehow didn't sound like an accusation. Brother, Isaac, Logan said. I need to tell you something. Tell me, Isaac Boone said. There's a situation on Highway 89. A man named Morano is running an extortion network along the corridor. He has 12 businesses. He's moving into the operations themselves. And he just threatened a family that has nothing to do with any world you or I have ever been part of. How bad? It's going to get worse before anyone can make it better. And I need time, Logan said. To do this right, I need to collect evidence. I need witnesses who will stand up. He stopped. I need to know that when the moment comes, there are people who understand how to stand a line without crossing it. There was a pause on the line, not a long one. Logan, Isaac Boone said, you haven't finished. What do you need? Logan looked at Walter. He looked at Rachel, who was looking back at him with the photograph of herself lying face down on the bar beside her elbow. Tell me where you need us, Isaac said. And in those 6 words was the weight of 20 years of writing, and the weight of 8 years of silence, and the weight of a friendship that had survived the worst thing Logan had ever done and was apparently still standing. Not yet, Logan said. But when I call again, it'll be time. We'll be ready, Isaac said. Logan set the phone down on the bar. He looked at Walter and Rachel. He said, we have work to do, and we don't have much time to do it. Logan didn't sleep again after he put the phone down. He sat at the bar with a cup of black coffee that went cold while he was still holding it and went through what he knew, piece by piece, the way you go through a mechanical problem, not with emotion, not with the part of your mind that wants to react, but with the part that has to understand the shape of the thing before you can figure out where to apply pressure. Morano was not improvising. That was the first thing. A man who had photographs taken from across the street 5 days ago, who had keys to a filing cabinet that had never been forced, who had sent a package constructed to deliver a specific psychological message, broken things, burned records, proof of surveillance. That man was not reacting to last night's confrontation. He had been running this operation on a timeline that predated Logan's involvement by months. The confrontation with Gavin had changed one variable. Now Morano knew Logan was here. Everything else was already in motion. The second thing Logan knew was that speed was going to work against them if they let it. Morano's organization would be expecting a reaction anger, possibly a countermove, possibly Logan making contact with people from his past in a way that was visible and loud. That was what they would be watching for. And if that's what they were watching for, then the useful move was to not give it to them. Not yet. Walter came in at 6:30, moving carefully around the box on the back step that Logan had brought inside. He looked at the contents laid out on the bar, the smashed bottles, the burned ledger, the photograph, with the expression of a man who is deciding how much of what he feels he is going to allow into his face. He sat down on the stool across from Logan and picked up the cold coffee and set it aside. Tell me what you need, he said. That was Walter. 3 words, no dramatics, and the entire weight of a man's resources behind it. I need Rachel's accounting skills, Logan said. I need to know what the financial picture looks like across every business on this corridor that Morano has touched. Not estimates, real numbers. What they were paying before he arrived, what they started paying after, what the discrepancy looks like over time. Rachel can do that. I know she can. I need her to be willing to make contact with the other businesses. Carefully, not by telephone, in persons, one at a time, in places that aren't here. She'll be willing. She'll also need to be careful. They're watching her movements. Walter's face did something controlled and unpleasant. The photograph. Yes. Is she in danger? Logan looked at him directly. Everyone in this situation is potentially in danger. I'm not going to pretend otherwise to make you feel better. What I will tell you is that the way to reduce that danger is not to hide. It's to move faster than they expect and build something they can't destroy. Walter nodded slowly. And what are you building? A case, Logan said. A real one. With documentation, witnesses, financial records, and evidence that doesn't disappear if they break into this office again. He paused. I'm going to need copies of everything stored somewhere they can't reach. I'm going to need people to talk. And I know that second part is harder than the first. People are scared, Walter said. I know. Dave Harmon at the Pineview, he's been paying Morano for 4 months. He's got 2 kids in high school and a wife with a medical condition, and he is not a man who is going to stand up in front of a camera and say anything that has his name on it. Not yet, Logan said. Logan, not yet, he said again. That's different from never. People who are afraid don't become brave because someone tells them to be brave. They become brave when they understand that they are not alone. That's what we have to build first. The understanding that no one on this highway is facing Morano by themselves. Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and the call you made last night? That's for later, Logan said. That's for the moment when we need something that evidence and witnesses can't provide by themselves. A line, a visible physical line, your old brothers. Some of them, Logan said. The right ones. Rachel arrived at 7:15, an hour before the Roadhouse opened. She'd driven from her apartment in town, rather than spending the night the way she sometimes did when the bookkeeping ran late, and Logan could see from the slight tightness around her eyes that she hadn't slept much either. She looked at the photograph lying face down on the bar where she'd left it, and she didn't pick it up. She just noted that it was still there, and then she looked at Logan. You have a plan, she said. Not a question. The beginning of one. Tell me what I'm doing, he told her. She listened without interrupting, which was one of Rachel's qualities that he'd come to rely on over 3 years. She was not a person who needed to insert herself into information while it was being delivered. She let the whole shape of it come to her first, and then she asked her questions. The other businesses, she said when he'd finished. You want me to go to them directly? Yes. And ask them to share financial records with me? Yes. These are people who are already afraid, who are being watched, who have been paying a man not to hurt them for months, and in some cases possibly longer. She held his gaze. And I'm going to walk up to them and say, what exactly? You're going to say that you're the bookkeeper from The Last Lantern, Logan said, and that you've been looking at your own numbers and you've noticed some irregularities. And you wondered if they'd seen anything similar. You're not asking them to join anything. You're not asking them to take any action. You're asking them a question that gives them permission to say out loud something they've been saying only inside their heads. Rachel considered that. She paused. That might actually work. I know it might work. You've done this before. A version of it. She picked up a pen from the bar and turned it over in her fingers. How many businesses? Walter says 12 along the corridor. Start with the ones closest to us. Harmon's Diner first. Walter has a relationship there. Dave Harmon won't talk. Maybe not the first visit. But he'll remember that you came. And when the second visit happens, and there will be a second visit, he'll be a little less certain that silence is protecting him. Rachel put the pen down. She looked at her grandfather, who was nodding, and then back at Logan. You've been planning this since last night. I've been thinking about the shape of it, Logan said. There's a difference. What's the difference? Planning assumes I know how it ends. Thinking about the shape means I know the direction and I'm willing to adjust as we learn more. She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it. Okay, she said. Okay, I'll start with Harmon. She went that afternoon, between the lunch rush and the dinner prep, in her truck with the loud muffler that Logan had suggested she not fix yet. A truck that everyone on the highway recognized was less likely to make people think they were being visited by someone new and unknown. She drove to the Pineview Diner and asked for Dave Harmon. And Dave came out from the kitchen with flour on his apron and the expression of a man who is perpetually slightly behind on everything he needs to do. He recognized Rachel. He poured her a coffee without being asked. She said, Dave, I've been going through our numbers from the past 18 months, and I found something strange. A recurring gap in the cash flow that doesn't match any of our regular expenses. I don't know what to make of it. Have you seen anything like that in your books? Dave Harmon went very still. He looked at his coffee. He looked at the front door. He looked at the kitchen pass-through where his line, cook, was visible. And then he looked back at Rachel with an expression that was not confusion, an expression that was, very specifically, recognition wearing the costume of confusion. I wouldn't know about anything like that, he said. Okay, Rachel said. I'm sorry to bother you. I just thought, since we're on the same stretch of highway, maybe you'd seen something similar and could give me some insight. She finished her coffee. She stood up. She put $5 on the counter. Rachel, Dave said. She looked at him. He leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice. I haven't seen anything. And I'd suggest that you haven't seen anything either. He held her eyes. Because seeing things in these kinds of situations has consequence. What kind of situations? Rachel said. He didn't answer that. He picked up her $5 and put it in his apron pocket and went back to the kitchen. And Rachel drove back to the last lantern with the windows down, thinking about the way he'd said consequences and how the word had sat in his mouth like something he'd been holding for a long time and was still not sure how to put down. She told Logan what had happened. He listened. He nodded. That's the first visit, he said. He was terrified. Yes. Logan, he's genuinely terrified. Not of us, of them. I know, Logan said. That's the information. Now we know what we're working against. It's not indifference. It's not people who don't care about what's happening to them. It's people who are completely convinced that caring out loud will make things worse. Will it? He looked at her. It will if they do it alone. That's the only condition under which they're right. Over the next 4 days, Rachel visited 6 businesses along the highway corridor. A motel called the Desert Anchor. A truck stop named Reyes Brothers that had been in the same family for 31 years. A garage called Flat Rock Auto that specialized in long-haul rigs. A lunch counter called Marta's that had been open since 1987. A roadside Western wear store. A small freight staging company at the edge of a county road that most people drove past without slowing. At each stop, she asked her question carefully and differently each time, tailored to the person in front of her, not scripted, because scripted questions produce scripted denials, but genuine specific questions that acknowledged the particular thing that each business was facing without naming Morano directly. At 4 of the 6 stops, she was told, in various ways, that the person she was speaking to had not seen anything unusual and could not help her. At the 5th stop, Reyes Brothers truck stop, the older of the 2 brothers, a man named Ernesto, who had not said anything when Rachel first spoke to him, came out to her truck as she was leaving and knocked on the window and said, very quietly, "You're from the last lantern." "Yes," Rachel said. The bartender there, the one Wisto, stopped, looked around at the lot, looked back. "The one they say is North Star." Rachel took a breath. "Why do you ask?" "Because 3 months ago," Ernesto said, "I heard that name from a man who was sitting right where you're sitting, a delivery driver who'd come through New Mexico. He said that if things on the highway got bad enough, North Star would know what to do." Ernesto paused. "I didn't understand what he meant at the time. Do you understand it now?" Rachel said. Ernesto looked at her for a long moment. "My brother wants to sell," he said, "because he is afraid. I don't want to sell. Because my father built this place, and I have no idea how to stop what's happening to us." "You're not alone on this highway," Rachel said. "Nobody's ever made that feel true before," Ernesto said. "I know," Rachel said. "We're working on it." She drove back to the last lantern with her hands tight on the wheel and her jaw tight, and something in her chest that was not quite hope, but was the thing that comes immediately before it. At the 6th stop, Marta herself, 68 years old, bad knees, apron she'd owned for 20 years, down across from Rachel in a booth and put an envelope on the table. Rachel looked at it. "Cash payments," Marta said. 11 weeks of them. I wrote down every date, every amount, and the initials of the man who collected each time. Because My mother always said, if someone is going to do something wrong to you, you make a record of it, because records are the only thing that outlast bullies. She pushed the envelope across the table. I've been waiting for 3 months for someone to come ask me the right question. Rachel's hand went still on the envelope. Marta, she said, this is exactly what we need. I have more, Marta said. I have the license plates of every vehicle that came into my lot that I didn't recognize. I wrote those down too. She folded her hands on the table. Now, what are we going to do with it? Logan was in the back room when Rachel came in. He heard the tone of her footsteps, not slow, not careful, the fast, deliberate steps of someone carrying something significant, and he came out before she called for him. She put Marta's envelope on the bar. He opened it. He read the dates and amounts and initials. He looked at the license plate records. He set them down. There's a woman at Marta's, Rachel said, who has been keeping records for 11 weeks by herself in a booth in a lunch counter because her mother told her to write things down. Good mother, Logan said quietly. She wants to know what we're going to do with it. She's earned the right to know. Logan looked at the records again. Then he looked at Rachel. How many of the others? 4 said nothing. Ernesto at Reyes Brothers is on the edge. He needs to see something real before he commits. And Marta is already committed. Rachel's voice steadied. Logan, she's been doing this alone. For 11 weeks. People who are doing things alone, Logan said, need to find out that they're not alone as soon as possible. So what do? We go back to all of them, starting tomorrow. He picked up the envelope and held it carefully, the way you hold something that has weight beyond its physical weight. And this time we're not asking questions. We're showing them what's already been built and asking them if they want to be part of building it stronger. Rachel nodded. Then she said, the ledger that was burned. Our backup account books, what about them? I can reconstruct them. Every transaction we've made in the past 2 years. I have it in my head. Not because I'm extraordinary, because these are my grandfather's books, and I have checked them every week for 2 years, and I know them. She paused. And if I can reconstruct ours, I can help reconstruct theirs. Every business on this corridor that's been paying Morano, if they give me their records, even partial records, I can build a financial picture of this whole operation. What he's been taking, how it flows, where it goes. Logan looked at her for a moment. 3 years of watching her work had given him a thorough appreciation of what she was capable of. But this was something he hadn't anticipated, not the skill, but the direction she was pointing it. That would be evidence, he said. That would be the kind of evidence, Rachel said, that you can hand to a state investigator, and that doesn't require any of these business owners to stand in a courtroom until there's already a case built around it. You'd need access to their records. I know. Some of them won't give it. Some of them will. Marta already has. She straightened. And Ernesto is close. Logan set the envelope down. He picked up his phone. He looked at the screen for a moment. I need to call Isaac again, he said. Is it time? Not yet. But I need him to know that the timeline has moved. He looked at Rachel. What you're building, the financial picture, how long do you need? If I work through the nights, she calculated quickly, her eyes going slightly distant, the way they did when she was running numbers in her head. And if I can get access to at least 4 or 5 sets of records, 2 weeks, maybe 10 days. You have 10 days, Logan said. After that, I don't know how much longer I can keep this from escalating on Morano's end. Why? Because we embarrassed his man in a room full of witnesses 4 days ago. Because he sent us a package designed to frighten us, and we haven't responded the way frightened people respond. He's waiting to see what we do. And a man like Morano, Logan stopped, set the phone down, picked it up again. A man like Morano doesn't wait indefinitely. At some point, waiting starts to feel like losing. And when that happens, he stops calculating and starts punishing. Rachel absorbed that. 10 days, she said. 10 days, Logan said. He called Isaac. Isaac Boone picked up on the second ring. Tell me something good, Isaac said. Not yet, Logan said. But I'm calling to tell you, the shape is getting clearer. How clear? Clear enough that I can see the outline of what we're going to need from you. And it's not what you'd expect. Nothing with you ever is, Isaac said. And there was warmth in it, and the particular quality of a man who has known someone long enough to find their complexity reassuring rather than exhausting. What do we need to be ready to do? Hold a line, Logan said, not cross it. Hold it. There was a pause. You know my people can do that. I know some of your people can do that. I need you to tell me that the ones you bring. I hear you, Isaac said. I'll choose carefully. And Isaac, I need them to understand that when we do this, we are not the story. The people on this highway are the story. He paused, searching for the right word, and found the one that was true rather than the one that sounded better. We are the line between them and more harm. That's all. We don't start anything. We don't finish anything that doesn't need finishing. We stand where we need to stand, and we let the law do what it's there to do. Logan. Isaac's voice was steady. Brother, I've been waiting 8 years for you to call me. Not because I thought you'd need something, because I thought you'd be ready to stand somewhere again when it mattered. I'm not going to waste that call. Logan didn't say anything for a moment. Thank you, he finally said. I'll call when it's time. He hung up. Walter was standing at the end of the bar. He'd been there for the last part of the conversation, listening without pretending not to. How many? Walter said. Enough, Logan said. Not an army, enough. Walter nodded. He reached under the bar and produced the secondary cash register, an old metal box Logan hadn't seen before, and opened it and put it on the bar. Inside were folded bills and a handwritten ledger that went back 20 years. Emergency fund, Walter said. For when the Roadhouse needs something I haven't budgeted for. He slid it across to Logan. Whatever you need, Walter said. For cameras, for legal fees, for driving Rachel to Marta's and Reyes Brothers, and every other place on this highway. Whatever it takes. Logan looked at the box. He looked at Walter. I'll account for every cent, he said. I know you will, Walter said. I'm not giving it to you because I trust your accounting. Logan, I'm giving it to you because you sat in my bar for 3 years, and every morning when I came in, the place was exactly what it was supposed to be, and the people in it were taken care of. That's not nothing. Walter closed the metal box and pushed it across the bar. That's everything. The following 3 days were a controlled kind of chaos that looked, from the outside, entirely ordinary. The last lantern opened at its regular time, served its regular customers, ran its regular kitchen. Rachel worked the afternoon shift as usual and drove to her accounting class on Thursday as usual. The muffler on her truck loud enough to be tracked from a block away. But this time, Logan followed her in a borrowed car 2 minutes behind, watching the vehicles on the road around her, learning the pattern of anyone who might be maintaining surveillance. He spotted the same dark pickup twice on the Thursday drive. Different parking spots. Same truck. He wrote down the plate number without acknowledging that he'd seen it. In between shifts, Rachel drove to Marta's and to Reyes Brothers and to a motel called the Desert Anchor. And she sat with Ernesto Reyes for 2 hours and showed him what Marta had given her and explained what the financial picture was starting to look like. And Ernesto sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and said, very quietly, my father used to say that the only thing that beats a man who thinks he owns everything is a group of people who own nothing but decide they own each other. Your father was right, Rachel said. Ernesto opened a filing cabinet behind his desk and pulled out a folder. I've been keeping these for 2 months, he said. I didn't know why. I felt like I should have something in writing. Inside the folder were invoices with handwritten notes in the margins, dates, initials, amounts, a notation system that Ernesto had developed himself, quietly, in the margins of his own business records, hiding what was happening to him in plain sight inside the records of what his business was supposed to be. Rachel held the folder like it was something irreplaceable. Because it was. Ernesto, she said, this is enough to build half the picture by itself. Is it enough to stop them? It's enough to start stopping them, she said, which is different, but it's where you have to start. He looked at her for a long time. The man at the last lantern, he said. Logan, North Star. Logan, Rachel said again, deliberately. Ernesto nodded. What's he going to do? He's going to make sure, Rachel said, that when you're all ready to stop hiding, there's something to come out into. On the seventh night, the package arrived at Marta's. Not smashed bottles this time. A single brick, thrown through the lunch counter's front window at 2 in the morning, with a note tied to it that said, in block letters, "Last chance, pay or close." Marta called Rachel at 6 in the morning. Her voice was entirely steady. "They know I talked to someone," she said. "Or they're escalating generally. Either way, I want you to know that it changes nothing for me." "Marta, I've been running this lunch counter since Reagan was president," Marta said. "I have survived a flood, 2 recessions, a gas leak that took out my kitchen for 6 weeks, and a health inspector who had a personal grudge against me that I never fully understood. A brick through a window is not going to be the thing that closes me down." Rachel told Logan. Logan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They're accelerating. Is that bad?" "It's information." He looked at the plate number he'd written down, the dark pickup from Thursday. "It means we've rattled something, even without doing anything visible. That means they can feel the shape of what we're building, even if they can't see it. Which means we have less time than I thought." "How much less?" "I don't know. But we need those records from the remaining businesses faster than 10 days. He picked up his phone. "And I need to make another call." "To Isaac?" "To a state police contact," Logan said. "A man I know from a long time ago. An investigator who worked a case I was peripherally involved in years back, and who I've stayed out of touch with for reasons that are no longer relevant." "A cop?" Rachel said. "Logan, if you contact law enforcement now, before the evidence is complete." "I'm not contacting him to report anything," Logan said. "I'm contacting him to find out whether there's already an open investigation. Because if Morano's been operating in this corridor for 18 months and the state police don't have an open file," he paused, "then either Morano is very good at staying invisible, or someone is keeping the file closed." The implications of that settled over Rachel slowly, like weather coming in. "You think there's someone," she started. "I think I need to know," Logan said. "Before we hand anything to anyone with a badge, I need to know who I'm handing it to." He made the call. The contact's name was Valdez Henry. Valdez, 12 years with the State Fraud and Organized Crime Unit. A man Logan had last spoken to in the context of a drug distribution investigation that had passed through the Hells Angels corridor in 2014, and that Logan had helped quietly redirect away from violence. Valdez answered on the 4th ring. "This is a number I wasn't expecting to see," Valdez said. "Likewise," Logan said. "I have a situation. Corridor along 89, northern Arizona. A man named Carlo Morano. I need to know if the name is in any file you have access to." There was a pause. "I'm going to need to call you back." "When?" "Give me 2 hours." The 2 hours were the longest Logan had spent in the Roadhouse since he'd arrived. He wiped the bar 4 times without thinking about it. He answered 2 customer questions without remembering either of them afterward. He watched the highway through the front window and thought about the dark pickup and about Marta's brick and about the burned ledger and about the photograph of Rachel walking to her truck, not knowing anyone was watching. Valdez called back in 90 minutes. "The name Morano is in 3 active files," Valdez said, without preamble. "Federal Cargo Theft Task Force, State Financial Crimes, and a cross-referenced file on organized highway corridor operations that's been open for 14 months. 14 months, Logan said. "The problem is evidence," Valdez said. "The businesses along that corridor won't talk," Logan said. "Won't talk. And without witnesses or documentation, the files stay open but they don't move." A pause. "Why are you calling, Logan?" "Because," Logan said, "I think the documentation situation might be changing." Another pause. Longer. "How much documentation are we talking about?" "Enough to build a case if your office is willing to accept it through a channel that isn't." He thought about how to say this. "Direct. You're not going to walk into my office." "No. And the people with the documentation, they need to see what happens to the first person who comes forward before any of the others will come forward. They need to see that it doesn't cost them everything." "That's not an unreasonable ask," Valdez said. "But it's also not something I can guarantee." "I know. I'm not asking you to guarantee it. I'm asking you whether your office is the right place for what we're building, or whether I need to go somewhere else." The pause before Valdez's answer was the kind that tells you the person on the other end is making a real decision. Not a tactical one, a real one. Send me what you have, Valdez said finally. Secure channel. I'll tell you if it's enough to move. Give me a week, Logan. Valdez's voice dropped. The 14-month file I mentioned. There's a reason it hasn't moved faster. Someone has been applying pressure to keep it at a low priority. I don't know who yet, but I'd suggest you move faster than a week. Logan set the phone down on the bar. He stood there for a moment, looking at it. Then he looked up at Walter, who was watching him from the other end of the bar with the particular patience of a man who has learned, at 73, that the news is rarely entirely good, and the question is always what you do with what you have. Change of timeline, Logan said. Walter nodded. How much change? We have less than a week, Logan said, to build what we were planning to build in 10 days. Walter said, what do you need? I need Rachel, Logan said. I need her to not sleep for 4 days. I need Marta and Ernesto and every other person on this highway who has a piece of what we need. I need all of them talking to Rachel before Saturday. I'll call Marta myself, Walter said. He was already reaching for the phone. And Dave Harmon. Harmon, Walter said, has known me for 30 years. There are things I haven't called in that I'm going to call in tonight. He held the phone and looked at Logan. You spent 8 years trying not to be what you used to be. That's done now, not because you failed, but because sometimes the person you were is the exact person the situation requires. Walter's hand steadied on the phone. Let me be the person this situation requires from me. This is my highway too. Logan looked at him. At 73, still straight-backed, still steady, still entirely himself, in a way that Logan had spent 3 years quietly trying to learn from. Make the call, Logan said. Walter made the call. And the last Lantern Roadhouse, on a desert highway in northern Arizona, began building the thing that Morano had believed was impossible to build, a wall made entirely of ordinary people who had decided that being afraid alone was worse than being brave together. Walter called Dave Harmon at 9:15 that night, and the conversation lasted 47 minutes, which Logan knew because he was sitting close enough to hear Walter's side of it, and he watched the clock without meaning to. He couldn't hear Harmon's voice, but he could hear Walter's steady, unhurried, carrying 30 years of shared highway history in every sentence. Not pleading, not persuading, just reminding a man that certain things existed between people who had watched each other's children grow up, who had lent each other equipment during bad seasons, who had shown up at each other's hospitals and funerals and reopening days without being asked. Walter didn't mention Morano for the first 20 minutes. He asked about Harmon's wife. He asked about the kids. He talked about the Bluegrass Festival and about a stretch of the highway that the county was planning to repave, and about a mutual acquaintance who'd retired to Tucson and wasn't adjusting well to the heat. And then, with the same unhurried steadiness, he said, Dave, I need you to tell me what's actually happening to your business. There was a long silence on Harmon's end. Then Harmon talked for 19 minutes without stopping. Logan listened to Walter listen, and he thought about the particular courage it takes to say something out loud that you have been holding silently for months. How the saying of it is not just information transfer, but something closer to laying down a weight that has been changing the shape of your spine, and you didn't even fully know how much until your hands are empty. When Walter set the phone down, he looked at Logan and said, he's in. What changed? Logan said. Nothing, Walter said. He was always in. He just needed someone to go first. Logan thought about that for the rest of the night. The 4 days that followed were the hardest working days Logan could remember since his riding years, and they had a different quality from those daysless adrenaline, more grit, the specific exhaustion of careful sustained effort rather than acute crisis. Rachel worked at the kitchen table from 6 in the morning until past midnight. Surrounded by ledgers and printed invoices and handwritten notes on legal pads, building a financial portrait of Morano's operation from the fragments that each business owner had handed over. Marta drove her own car to the Roadhouse on the second day and sat across the kitchen table from Rachel for 6 hours, going through 11 weeks of payment records in the envelope she'd been keeping, supplementing them from memory with details she hadn't written down. Dates she remembered because of what else had been happening that week, amounts she was certain of because she kept the cash in a specific place and could feel the difference in the weight of the drawer. Ernesto Reyes came on the third day with his folder and a second folder he'd found in a filing cabinet that he hadn't looked at in 2 months, inside which were not just his own records, but records of conversations he'd had with 2 other business owners who had told him things they hadn't told anyone else because Ernesto was the kind of man people told things to. Quietly, in the understanding that the telling was not a betrayal of their own silence, but a deposit in a shared account they hoped would someday be useful. Dave Harmon didn't come in person. He sent his wife, Linda, who arrived with a box of documents so organized and so thoroughly annotated that Rachel stared at it for a full 30 seconds before saying anything. "How long has she been keeping these?" Logan said quietly. Rachel looked up. "Since the first payment." She dated and initialed every single one. She photographed every vehicle that came to their lot on collection days. Logan looked at the box, at the 4 months of methodical, careful documentation that Linda Harmon had been building inside her husband's business while Dave himself had been operating on the assumption that staying silent was keeping them safe. "She knew we'd need it someday," Rachel said. "She hoped," Logan said. "That's different from knowing. Hoping and keeping records anyway." He stopped. "That's what?" Rachel said. "That's the bravest thing in this whole building right now," he said. By the end of the 4th day, Rachel had records from 7 businesses. The combined financial picture she had built was not a sketch. It was a detailed ledger of a criminal operation cash collection amounts, dates, collection schedules, the pattern of escalation when a business was late, the secondary intimidation measures applied when a business resisted, and the connecting tissue between all of them that pointed, again and again, to a single financial center, a single point through which Morano's money moved. She called Valdez through Logan. She described what she had without naming names or specifying locations. She told him the scope of the documentation. There was a silence on the line. Then Valdez said, if that's accurate." "It's accurate," Rachel said. "I'm an accountant. I know what accurate looks like. Can you get it to me without using the mail or a traceable upload?" "I need 1 more day," she said. "And then yes." "You have 1 more day," Valdez said. "After that, I can't promise the timeline I can offer you stays open." She worked through the night. Logan stayed up with her. Not working, he had no place in the financial construction, but present. He kept coffee coming and kept the Roadhouse quiet, and twice, when Rachel went still over a particular set of numbers and her breathing changed in the way it does, when something doesn't add up and you're trying to figure out whether the error is in the data or in your own understanding, he said nothing and waited, because he had learned in 20 years of writing that there is a kind of silence that is more useful than any question. Both times, after a few minutes, Rachel said something like "there it is" and went back to writing, and Logan refilled her cup. At 3 in the morning, she looked up from the table and said, "Logan, yeah, Morano isn't just collecting money. The cash is moving through 4 of these businesses as what looks like legitimate revenue. He's been laundering it. These businesses, the ones who've been paying him, they are also being used as the mechanism to clean the money." She held up a sheet covered in her handwriting, which means that if this ever goes to court, some of these business owners could look like participants rather than victims. Logan sat down across from her. "Can you separate it?" he said. "I can document the coercion," she said. "I can show exactly when the payments started relative to the first contact from Gavin's people, and I can show that the cash's revenue patterns began after the coercion, not before. That establishes the sequence." She tapped the sheet. "But it needs to be in the package we send to Valdez. It's not just evidence of what Morano did. It's protection for the people he used. Then make sure it's in there." She nodded and went back to work. Logan sat across from her in the quiet Roadhouse kitchen, and he thought about Morano reading A Morning Somewhere, moving through his day with the complete confidence of a man who had not yet understood that the silence he mistook for submission was actually construction. He thought about Saturday night, about the shape of what was coming. Because he knew it was coming, he'd known since the morning after Gavin's first visit that this was going to have a fixed point, a confrontation that couldn't be avoided, and that the only variable was how prepared they were when it arrived. He had 3 days left before Saturday, maybe less. At 4:45 in the morning, Rachel put her pen down, stacked the pages, and said, "It's done." Logan looked at the stack. "Send it," he said. She sent it to Valdez through a channel that Valdez provided, not email. Not anything that passed through a server with a recognizable address. Old-fashioned encrypted file transfer, the kind that intelligence-adjacent operations had been using since before Rachel was born, and that Logan had a working knowledge of, from years of moving sensitive information inside a community that had very specific reasons to value privacy. Valdez called back in 4 hours. "This is enough to move," he said. "Not just enough. This is a pause that makes a 14-month file suddenly very active." "How active?" Logan said. "I need 48 hours to bring in the right people. State investigators and federal. The Cargo Theft Task Force is going to want to be part of this. They have jurisdiction on the laundering angle." 48 hours is Saturday night, Logan said. "Is that a problem?" Logan thought about Gavin. About the specific calculation of a man whose face in that roadhouse had moved through grin to recognition to recalculation to the cold decision of a strategic pause. A man who had left promising to return. A man who had sent a package of smashed glass and burned paper and a photograph of a woman who didn't know she was being watched. A man who had not in 10 days done anything else. That was the thing that had been sitting in the back of Logan's mind since the photograph arrived. Gavin had promised to return and had not returned. That silence was not patience. That was preparation. "It might be a problem," Logan said. "Or it might be exactly the right timing." "Explain." "Morano is going to move on the last lantern. It's the business where the resistance started. It's the business where his man lost face in front of witnesses. And Morano has spent 10 days watching and not acting, which means he's been preparing something more significant than a brick through a window." Logan's voice stayed level. "When he comes, I'd rather the people with badges already be on their way. I can have people in the area by Saturday evening," Valdez said slowly. "Not inside. Not in a position that compromises the investigation, but close." "That's enough," Logan said. "Logan." Valdez's voice changed slightly. "What are you planning?" "To be where I've always been," Logan said. "Behind the bar." He called Isaac on Friday morning. "Tomorrow night," Logan said. Isaac didn't ask whether he was sure. He said, "How many do you need?" "Enough to hold a perimeter. Not enough to look like an invasion. I need visible presence. Isaac, I need Morano's people to understand the scope of what they've walked into. But I need everyone there to know exactly what they can and can't do." "I've talked to every man I'm bringing," Isaac said. "Personally, face to face. Not a phone call, not a message. I sat across from each of them and I told them what this is and what it isn't. And I let the ones who couldn't live with the limits go home. I've got 22 riders who understand that we are not there to start anything." 22, Logan said. "That enough? That's perfect," Logan said. Isaac said. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me after." "I was going to say be careful, brother," Isaac said, with something in his voice that was warmth and history and the particular texture of a friendship that had survived 8 years of silence and was evidently more durable than either of them had tested. "When have I ever been anything else?" Logan almost laughed. It was the first time in 10 days that the impulse had come. "Tomorrow," he said. "Highway 89. I'll text you the coordinates." He sent the coordinates. Then he set the phone down and went back to work. Saturday came in the way that significant days often do, quietly, unremarkably, as if the ordinary hours of it don't know what the evening holds. The Roadhouse opened at its regular time. The regular customers came. Logan poured drinks and cleared glasses and answered questions about the specials and did every ordinary thing with the same unhurried competence he'd brought to every shift for 3 years. But under the ordinary surface, things were moving. Rachel had positioned copies of the complete evidence package in 3 separate secure locations, one with Valdez, one with a journalist in Phoenix, whose Phoenix Logan had asked Valdez to provide, and whom Rachel had contacted the previous day, and one in an encrypted cloud storage that was accessible from any device if the physical copies were somehow destroyed. If Morano's people came tonight and took every piece of paper in the building, the case would still exist. It would exist in 3 places simultaneously, and one of those places had already been read by a journalist whose editor had assigned 2 more reporters to the story. Walter knew. He had been told everything, all of it, without any softening, because Walter Briggs was not a man you protected from information about his own situation. He had listened. He had nodded. He had said, "Tell me where to stand and I'll stand there." Behind the bar, Logan said, "With Rachel. Don't go near Gavin's men no matter what they do. Your job tonight is to stay between them and the customers. And your job?" "My job," Logan said, "is to finish what started 10 days ago." The dinner crowd arrived at its regular time. Families regulars, a table of highway workers, 2 truckers at the counter. The room filled with the ordinary sound of people eating and talking, and the clink of glasses, and the smell of the kitchen, and the particular comfortable noise that a roadhouse makes when it is doing what it was built to do. Logan moved behind the bar. He was aware of everything, the placement of every person in the room, the position of the 2 exits, the location of Rachel at the register, the position of Walter at the service end of the bar. He was aware, in the way he'd always been aware, that weather sense that the regulars had noticed and never been able to quite articulate, except that tonight it wasn't instinct operating on incomplete information. Tonight he knew exactly what was coming. He just didn't know the minute. He found out at 8:47. The door opened and Gavin Locke walked in. He had 8 men with him. Not the same 4 from before. Thieves were different. More. And they were not arranged casually. They spread through the room with the particular efficiency of people who have been briefed on a layout and have thought about lines of movement. 2 went immediately to the back hallway. 2 positioned near the exit. Gavin walked directly to the bar. The room changed. Not loudly. The noise didn't stop all at once, because most people take a moment to register that the atmosphere has shifted before they react. But the register happened, table by table, and within 30 seconds, the room was quieter than it should have been for how many people were in it. Gavin reached the bar and looked at Logan with the expression of a man who has spent 10 days constructing an event in his mind and is now arriving at it. "Evening," Gavin said. "Gavin," Logan said. The use of his name seemed to briefly locate Gavin differently than he expected. He recovered quickly. "Carlo Morano sends his regards," he said. "And his final offer." He produced an envelope and set it on the bar. Inside that is a transfer document. "Walter Briggs signs partial ownership of this establishment to a holding company registered in Nevada. In exchange, all outstanding security fees are waived, and the Last Lantern continues to operate under its current management." Walter, from the service end of the bar, said nothing. His jaw was set, and his hands were flat on the bar, and he looked at Gavin the way a man looks at something that is trying to take what he built. "The other option," Gavin continued, "is that this establishment closes. Tonight. With or without the paperwork." He glanced at the envelope. "Mr. Morano strongly prefers the paperwork." Logan looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it. Gavin's eyes moved to Logan. "And you," he said, "should know that whatever reputation you may have had once, this is not a situation that reputation resolves. This is a business transaction." "You're right," Logan said. "It's not a situation that reputation resolves." Something in Gavin's posture shifted slightly, not relaxing, not tightening, but recalibrating. He had not expected agreement. "Walter's not signing," Logan said. "And you're going to leave." "That's not—" "Before I explain why," Logan said, "I want you to hear something." He held Gavin's eyes. Not performing, not threatening. Just looking at a man with the complete steadiness of someone who knows exactly what they're doing and has made their peace with it. "The financial records of your employer's operation on this highway," Logan said, were delivered 3 days ago to a state investigator named Valdez, who is currently coordinating with a federal cargo theft task force. The documentation covers 14 months of extortion activity across 12 businesses, including a money laundering network, using those businesses as shells. The package includes dates, amounts, the names of your collection people, license plate records, surveillance photographs, and financial analysis performed by a certified accountant that establishes criminal culpability at the organizational level. Gavin did not move. A copy of the same documentation, Logan said, is currently in the hands of a journalist at the Phoenix Tribune, whose editor has assigned a full team to the story. That story will publish, regardless of what happens tonight. It exists in places you cannot reach. The room was absolutely silent now. Not the silence of people not listening. The silence of an entire room listening to every word. Gavin said very quietly, "You're bluffing." "No," Logan said. "I'm not. You can't have." The documentation was built over 4 days by 7 business owners on this highway who decided that being afraid alone was no longer acceptable. It includes records from Dave Harmon at the Pineview, from Marta's lunch counter, from the Reyes Brothers truck stop, from the Desert Anchor Motel, and from 3 others whose names I'll let Valdez tell you when he has that conversation. Logan didn't look away. "It's already done, Gavin. The only question left tonight is what charge you'd like to go home with." Something happened in Gavin's face then that Logan recognized from 20 years of standing in the middle of situations that had gone past the point where they were supposed to go. It was the moment when a man's map fails him entirely, when every route he had planned is blocked and he is standing in territory that doesn't correspond to anything he prepared for, and the options narrow to the ones that instinct generates in the absence of planning, and instinct in a cornered man is not reliable. Gavin came across the bar, not the envelope, not the document. He came across the bar with his hands reaching for Logan's collar and his face doing what a man's face does when calculation gives way to something older and less governed. Logan moved, not back, not away. He moved into it inside Gavin's reach before Gavin's hands could find purchase, one hand going to Gavin's wrist and redirecting, rather than blocking. The other going to his shoulder, using Gavin's own forward momentum to pivot him and bring him down against the near side of the bar, face first. Controlled, no more force than was necessary, his knee on the back of Gavin's thigh, Gavin's arm bent at an angle that was uncomfortable but not damaged. It took less than 3 seconds. The room already silent became a different kind of silent. The kind that comes after something has happened too fast to fully register. Logan pressed his forearm across Gavin's shoulder blades, steady and firm, and leaned down enough that only Gavin could hear what he said next. "I told myself 10 days ago that tonight wasn't going to be about me," Logan said quietly. "And it isn't. The people on this highway built the thing that's going to stop you. I just held the space open while they did it." He kept his voice level. "You have men near the exit and men in the hallway. Tell them to stand down, right now." Before the next 30 seconds, Gavin's face, pressed sideways against the bar, was doing something complicated and private. "Tell them," Logan said. "Stand down," Gavin said. It came out rougher than he probably intended, but it came out. The 2 men near the exit looked at each other. The 2 in the hallway appeared at the kitchen door. Nobody moved toward Logan. And then, from outside, from the parking lot and the highway shoulder, and the approach to the Roadhouse from both directions on Highway 89 came a sound that filled the desert night and entered the building through every wall simultaneously. Engines, not 1 or 2. Many. The particular combined roar of motorcycle engines in numbers that don't arrive by accident, that arrive because they have been coordinated by someone who understood exactly when the sound needed to arrive and what it needed to communicate. One of Gavin's men went to the window. Logan saw the man's face change. The parking lot held 22 Hells Angels bikes. Riders still seated, engines dropping to idle, forming a perimeter around the building and along the road with the calm, deliberate placement of people who know exactly where they need to be. No one was rushing. No one was loud. They sat on their bikes in the lit parking lot and they did not move toward the building. They didn't need to. Isaac Boone was at the front of it. Logan couldn't see him, but knew it without needing to. The same way you know where north is, after enough time with a compass. 22 men who had been told what this was and had chosen to come anyway, who understood that they were here not to fight, but to make the scope of the situation visible. A wall made of people who would not be moved. Gavin's remaining men looked at Gavin. Gavin was still pinned against the bar, and his options had just been reduced to a very small and clearly defined set. Logan eased the pressure on his shoulder, not releasing him, just easing. Last chance for this to go any direction other than arrest, he said. A car door slammed in the parking lot, then another, and another. Not bikes, vehicles. The kind with lights on the roof that hadn't been switched on yet but would be. Valdez had been 48 hours. Valdez had been exactly 48 hours. State police are in the lot, Logan said. Federal task force people are behind them. They have the documentation. They have the financial records. They have 7 witnesses. He stepped back. He did not grab Gavin again. Did not hold him. Just stepped back and left him there against the bar. And looked at him with the same expression he'd worn 10 days ago when he set the glass down. It's done. Gavin straightened slowly. He looked at Logan with the specific look of a man who cannot identify exactly where he went wrong and is going to be processing that question for a very long time. Who are you? He said. Not the way he'd said it the first night, mockingly, dismissively, genuinely. I told you the first night, Logan said. I'm the bartender. The doors opened. Carlo Morano arrived at 9:20, 3 minutes after the state police vehicles entered the lot. He came in a black car with 2 more men, and he was still operating on the information he'd had before Gavin's phone went unanswered, which meant he arrived expecting to find an operation in progress and found instead a parking lot full of Hell's Angels, riders and state police, and a man in a collared shirt talking to a federal agent beside a truck with a federal plate. He sat in the car for 45 seconds. Then he got out. Because a man like Carlo Morano does not run. Running is an admission, and he had spent 18 months building a network on this highway that he genuinely believed was impenetrable, and some part of him, the part that had kept him operational this long still, believed that the situation could be salvaged with the right conversation, that the right words to the right person would reveal a path he hadn't seen yet. He crossed the lot toward the building and stopped when Logan stepped outside. They stood in the parking lot, in the lit, busy, thoroughly witnessed parking lot, and looked at each other for the first time. Morano was older than Logan had expected, from Walter's descriptions. Mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of face that had once been handsome and was now composed, the face of a man who had learned to keep what he felt in a place where it wasn't visible. He looked at Logan, and then at the Hells Angels perimeter, and then back at Logan, with the expression of a man doing triage. You're North Star, Morano said. Not a question. I'm a bartender, Logan said. You've caused a significant amount of disruption to a legitimate business operation. What you're describing as disruption, Logan said, is 7 business owners choosing to tell the truth about what you did to them. I didn't make that choice. They did. Morano's eyes moved around the lot, calculating, counting. The documentation your people sent to law enforcement is incomplete. Valdez's team is going to tell you differently, Logan said. I have lawyers. I know you do, Logan said. And they're going to have an interesting conversation with the records Rachel Briggs built, which includes not just the payment amounts and schedules, but the money laundering network you built into the businesses you were extorting. Logan kept his voice even, including the paper trail that shows the cash being moved to 3 shell companies in Nevada before being distributed as what appears to be legitimate commercial revenue. Your lawyers are going to need more than lawyers. Something happened in Morano's composure. Then a small, tightly controlled fracture, the kind that only shows for a second and then gets covered. But Logan had spent 20 years watching people manage their composure under pressure, and he had learned to see the second before the covering. This highway, Morano said quietly, was not personal. I know, Logan said. That's the part these people can't fully understand yet. You were never looking at them as people. You were looking at a corridor with isolated assets and limited law enforcement response time. He paused. That's actually worse. You can't stop what's already in motion. It's already stopped, Logan said. Gavin is inside with state police. Your collection people are being identified right now by witnesses who kept records for months while you assumed their silence meant cooperation. He tilted his head slightly. What exactly do you think you're going to walk back into? Morano's face did the thing that faces do when the map has failed completely. Not anger, not fear, but the particular blankness of a man who has reached the end of his options and is standing in the space where the next move used to be. He looked at Logan for a long moment. You could have left, Morano said. When my man recognized you, you could have taken your reputation and walked away. This wasn't your fight. This highway, Logan said, is where I live. Those people, Walter and Rachel and Marta and Ernesto and Dave Harmon and every other person you spent 18 months grinding down, they're my neighbors. He looked at Morano without heat, without performance. That makes it my fight. Morano turned. He turned toward his car. He walked 2 steps. Mr. Morano, said a voice from the other side of the lot. Valdez, crossing toward them with 2 men in federal jackets behind him. I have some questions I need you to answer. Morano stopped. He straightened his collar. He turned toward Valdez with the practiced composure of a man preparing to exercise his right to counsel. Logan watched him go. He stood in the lit parking lot with 22 bike engines idling behind him, and the sound of law enforcement moving through his building, and the lights of the last lantern casting warm yellow across everything, and he felt something that took him a moment to identify, because it was not adrenaline, and it was not relief, and it was not the particular electric clarity of a confrontation survived. It was something quieter than those things. Isaac materialized at his shoulder. He had the same broad face, the same beard going white, the same unhurried way of occupying space that Logan remembered from the road. The quality of a man who moves at his own speed because he has long since stopped being worried about what it looks like. He stood beside Logan and looked at the lot, at the federal jackets and the state police vehicles, and Gavin being walked toward a car with his hands behind his back, and Morano standing very still while Valdez spoke to him. Not bad, Isaac said, for a bartender. I had help, Logan said. You had a lot of help, Isaac agreed. That woman in there, the one with the accounting, book, she did most of it. You know. I know, Logan said. You going to tell her that? She already knows. Isaac was quiet for a moment. The engines idled. The desert air was cool and wide around them. The way desert air gets at night, when the day's heat has finally lifted, and what's left is just the actual temperature of the world. You ready to come home? Isaac said. Logan looked at the last lantern behind him, at the warm lights, at Walter visible through the window, sitting on a stool with a glass of water, and the expression of a man who has made it through something he was not certain he would make it through. At Rachel, standing near the bar with her arms crossed and her phone in her hand and the look of someone reviewing numbers even now, even in this, because that is the kind of person she is. I am home, Logan said. Isaac looked at him. Not surprised. Maybe not even disappointed. More like confirmed. The way you look at something you've been expecting to see and finally see exactly where it is. Then I'll say goodnight, Isaac said. Thank you, Logan said. For all of it. Don't make me wait 8 years for the next call, Isaac said. I won't, Logan said. And he meant it. The last police vehicle left the last lantern parking lot at 11:50 that night, and when the taillights finally disappeared around the bend on Highway 89, the silence that settled over the Roadhouse was so complete and so sudden that several of the customers who had stayed, the ones who had refused to leave when the state police suggested they might want to, found themselves looking at each other as if checking whether the other person had also felt it. That specific shift in air pressure that a room undergoes when something that has been building for a long time finally, fully releases. Walter was the first one to speak. He was sitting on his stool at the service end of the bar, still in the same position he'd been in since Gavin's men had been walked out in handcuffs, the glass of water in front of him untouched and warm now. He looked at the room, at the customers, at Rachel. At the door, the police had come through and gone back out through, and he said, to no one and everyone, well, all right then. It wasn't much. But it was Walter, and from Walter it carried everything. Rachel laughed first. It came out slightly too loud and slightly too long, and she pressed her hand over her mouth immediately afterward, but the laugh had already gotten out, and it hit the room like something necessary, like the first rain after a long dry season. And two of the truckers at the counter started laughing too. And a woman at the booth in the corner let out a breath she had apparently been holding for the better part of 3 hours. And the room went from holding its breath silent to something warmer and louder and full of the specific energy of people who have shared something difficult and come out the other side of it together. Logan, behind the bar, didn't laugh. But something in his face opened, not dramatically, not with any of the visible release that the room was experiencing, but in the quiet, specific way of a man who has been carrying a tension so long and so completely that when it finally lifts, he needs a moment to recognize what the absence of it feels like. He reached under the bar and produced a bottle of bourbon that Walter kept for particular occasions, good occasions, the kind that earned the good bottle, and he lined up glasses along the bar and poured and said, "On the house." Nobody argued with that. The story of what had happened at the Last Lantern on a Saturday night in northern Arizona moved the way stories move along stretches of open highway faster than you expect and in directions you can't fully predict. By Sunday morning, the Phoenix Tribune had the story online under the byline of the journalist Rachel had contacted 3 days before. And by Sunday evening, it had been picked up by 2 wire services and a regional television affiliate. By Monday morning, the county was doing what counties do when something that has been happening quietly for 18 months suddenly becomes publicly visible, making a great deal of official noise about awareness and response, which is the institutional version of showing up late and rearranging the furniture. Logan read the Tribune article once, early Sunday morning, sitting at the bar with black coffee. The article named the businesses. It named Marano. It described the extortion network and the money laundering scheme and the particular method Marano's organization had used to isolate each business from the others, to make each one feel uniquely vulnerable rather than part of a pattern. The journalist had understood Rachel's financial documentation well enough to explain it clearly, which was not a small thing. Logan was not in the article, not by name. He had been very specific about that when Rachel first contacted the journalist. Rachel had told the journalist the bartender at the Last Lantern was not the story. He was part of how the story got told, but the story itself belonged to the 7 business owners who had kept records and shared them and trusted that the truth was more powerful than the fear of what telling it might cost them. The journalist had pushed back. The journalist had heard from somewhere, possibly Ernesto, who was not a man who could entirely conceal admiration, that the bartender at the Last Lantern was North Star Rourke, a name that meant something specific in certain circles. Logan had said through Rachel that if the journalist wanted the story she had, she would tell the story she had. And the story she had was about 7 ordinary people on a highway who built something extraordinary together. The journalist had agreed, because it was, in fact, the better story. Valdez called Logan on Sunday afternoon. His voice had the quality of a man who has not slept but is running on something better than sleep, the particular energy of a case that has, after 14 months of stagnation, suddenly begun moving very fast. Marano's people are cooperating, Valdez said. All of them except Gavin. Gavin is holding. But 3 of his collection crew and 2 of the men who were in the Roadhouse Saturday night are talking to federal prosecutors. What are they saying? Logan said. Enough to build the cargo theft charges independent of your documentation, Valdez said. The financial evidence Rachel built, that's the laundering case, and it's solid. What the cooperating witnesses are giving us is the operational structure, how it was organized, how the cargo moved, where it went. A pause. Logan, this is bigger than your corridor. The task force has been looking for the distribution hub for stolen freight in the Southwest for 2 years. Marano's network is connected to it. How far does it go? We'll know more in 2 weeks. But preliminary, we're looking at a trafficking operation that runs from the California ports through Arizona and into Texas. Murano's highway corridor was one staging layer. The isolated roadside businesses where they were designed to be invisible. Truck stop at a diner or a garage or a motel. They leave something. They pick something up. Nobody on the outside sees anything unusual because these places have trucks coming through all day. Logan was quiet for a moment. The business owners, he said, the ones who were being used. They're cooperating witnesses, not subjects. That's the official position, Valdez said. Rachel's documentation of the coercion timeline protects them. Every one of them starts paying Murano's people after documented first contact from Gavin's organization. The sequence is unambiguous. Their lawyers will get that in writing. A pause. The lawyers will also want to send those people a thank you card. Rachel, Logan said. Rachel, Valdez agreed. Tell her she did something that my office has been trying to do for over a year, with better results. Logan set the phone down. He thought about Linda Harmon, with her box of organized documents, photographing license plates in her own parking lot for 4 months. He thought about Marta, with her envelope, and her mother's advice about making records, because records outlast bullies. He thought about Ernesto's marginal notations, a man hiding evidence of what was being done to him inside the ordinary paperwork of his own business because it was the only place he had to put it. He thought about the journalist's article and the wire services and the television affiliate, and how by this time, tomorrow, there would not be a person on Highway 89 who didn't know what had been happening and what had stopped it. He thought about a man named Danny, standing on a highway outside Albuquerque, and the fraction of a judgment call that had changed everything. And he thought about how the judgment he'd made 10 days ago, the decision to go slowly, to build rather than confront, to collect rather than react, had produced something that no confrontation could have produced. Something durable, something documented, something that existed in multiple places simultaneously and would continue to exist regardless of what any one person did or didn't do. It wasn't the same. It wasn't compensation. But it was something real. On Monday, Dave Harmon drove to the Last Lantern. He came in the mid-morning, between the breakfast stragglers and the lunch rush, when the Roadhouse was quiet and Logan was alone at the bar doing inventory. Harmon was a large man, broad across the shoulders, with the look of someone who has done physical work for most of his adult life and whose body has the permanent memory of it. He sat down at the bar and didn't speak for a moment, just looked at the bar surface as if reading something written there. Logan set a coffee cup in front of him and filled it without being asked. I've been running the Pineview for 11 years, Harmon said. He wasn't looking up. I built it with my brother before he moved to Oregon. And when he left, I kept running it, and it's put my kids through school and paid for Linda's treatments, and it is. He stopped, took a breath. It is the only thing I've ever been truly good at. I know, Logan said. I should have talked sooner. Logan picked up a glass from the drying rack and turned it in his hands. The people who finally talked, they didn't talk sooner because they were cowards. They didn't talk sooner because every time they thought about talking, they looked at everything they had to lose and didn't see anything strong enough on the other side. Rachel made it strong enough, Harmon said. Rachel helped. You made it possible when you talked to Walter. Logan set the glass down, and Linda. Harmon looked up for the first time. Linda was keeping records for 4 months, Logan said. License plates, payment dates, every collection documented. She brought all of it when you still thought silence was protecting you. He held Harmon's eyes. She trusted that the truth would be useful, eventually, even before there was any evidence it would. Harmon's jaw worked. She didn't tell me, he said. All those months. She kept records. She didn't tell me she was doing it because she knew I'd have told her to stop. She knew the records mattered more than your comfort, Logan said. Not unkindly, as a fact. Harmon looked at the coffee. I want to tell her it was the right call. I'm having trouble saying it. Say it anyway, Logan said. The trouble doesn't mean you shouldn't say it. It means it matters. Harmon nodded. He picked up the coffee. He set it down. He said, the article in the Tribune. Your name wasn't in it. No. But the story isn't about me, Logan said. Harmon looked at him with the expression of a man trying to reconcile several things he believes simultaneously that don't quite fit together. "Who are you?" he said. And unlike Gavin's version of the same question, this one was asked with simple, genuine puzzlement. "Because I've heard things. What people are saying about that tattoo, about the name, and then you're here, 3 years, just behind the bar." "I'm behind the bar," Logan said, "because that's where I need to be." "That's not an answer." "It's the most accurate one I have," Logan said. "I'm a man who made some choices that I'm proud of, and some that I'm not, and who ended up on this highway and found that this is a good place to be. That's everything." Harmon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you. For my business, for my family." He paused. "For Linda's records being worth something." "They were worth everything," Logan said. "Go home and tell her that." Harmon left. Logan stood at the bar alone for a few minutes. He thought about worth, about what makes a thing worth doing when you're doing it in the absence of any certainty that it will matter. He thought about Linda Harmon photographing license plates in her own lot in the early morning, not knowing whether anyone would ever ask to see the photographs. He thought about Marta writing down initials and amounts in a plain envelope because her mother had said that records outlast bullies, and believing it enough to keep writing even when nothing was changing. He thought that there was a lesson in that, and that he already knew what it was, and that knowing it and living it were two different things that he was still, apparently, learning to do at the same time. Rachel found him like that, standing at the bar, glass in hand, not drinking it. When she came in at 11 with her laptop bag and a set of printed spreadsheets and the expression of someone who has already been working for 3 hours and intends to work for several more. "Valdez called me," she said, setting her bag on the bar. "What did he say?" "He said the federal task force wants a conference call with me this week about the financial documentation. He said they're describing it as," she paused, looked at her phone, read from it, "the most comprehensive victim-side financial reconstruction of a corridor extortion network we have encountered in a current active investigation." "Good," Logan said. "He also said," Rachel continued, "that there's a possibility the documentation will be used as a template for how future corridor extortion cases are approached. That the method victim businesses building a collective financial picture could become a model for how these investigations are initiated." Logan set the glass down. "That would mean it helps people outside this highway. That would mean it helps people who haven't been hurt yet," Rachel said. "Because law enforcement could identify the pattern earlier." Logan thought about that. About a thing built in a Roadhouse kitchen over 4 days of no-sleep work becoming a template. About 7 business owners on a desert highway producing something that outlasted their particular situation and traveled into other situations they would never know about. He thought Danny would have liked that. He didn't say it out loud, but he thought it clearly and without the usual weight. "There's something else," Rachel said. Her tone had changed slightly. Not bad news changed, different changed. The tone of someone preparing to say something they've been deciding whether to say. "What?" Logan said. She reached into her bag and produced a letter. Printed, not handwritten, on official-looking stationery. She put it on the bar. "It came to the Roadhouse address," she said. "Addressed to North Star Rourke. Care of the Last Lantern." Logan looked at the letter without touching it. "It's from a nonprofit in Tucson," Rachel said. "They work with veterans and formerly incarcerated people on vocational training and employment placement. They read the Tribune article Sumyon gave them a version of the story that included your name, and they're asking if you'd be willing to consult." She paused. "On conflict de-escalation training. They want to know if the approach you use, whatever it is, can be taught." Logan picked up the letter. He read it. He set it down. "Someone gave them my name," he said. "Ernesto," Rachel said. "I think. He mentioned you to someone who mentioned it to someone else." She watched him. "You're not invisible anymore, Logan. I don't know if you've fully registered that." "I've registered it." "Has it changed anything for you?" He thought about it. About the difference between being visible and being exposed. He'd spent 3 years confusing the two, assuming that one was the same as the other, That being known meant being vulnerable in the specific way he'd spent 8 years trying not to be vulnerable. But the past 10 days had shown him something different, that there were forms of visibility that were not the same as tempting him as target. That standing somewhere deliberately and being seen there was different from being found in a place you'd been hiding. Not the way I thought it would, he said. Rachel nodded slowly. What are you going to do with the letter? I'm going to think about it. That means yes, Rachel said. It means I'm going to think about it, Logan said. But the corner of his mouth moved slightly. Rachel picked up her spreadsheets. Walter wants to talk to you, she said. Tonight. After close. He has something he wants to ask you. About the letter? About the Roadhouse. After close, Walter produced the envelope. It wasn't large, a standard business envelope, slightly worn at the corners, the way things get when they've been carried in a breast pocket for a few days before being used. He set it on the bar between himself and Logan and put his hands flat on either side of it and didn't speak immediately, which was Walter's version of gathering himself before something important. I've been thinking about what I want to do with this place, Walter said. Not in the way I used to think about it. Not just keeping it running because it's what I know and because Irene and I built it and because letting it go would feel like... He stopped. I've been thinking about what it should be, what it could be. In the next chapter, Logan waited. Rachel's going to finish her qualification, Walter said. She's got real plans now. This bookkeeping service for highway businesses she's talked about, the cooperative accounting thing. She has a future that isn't this bar, and I'm glad for it. And I also know she loves this place and won't go far from it. Walter looked at the envelope, and I've been running it alone in the sense of ownership since Irene passed. And I've been thinking about what it means to run something alone when you don't have to. He pushed the envelope across the bar. Logan looked at it. I'm offering you a 25% ownership stake in the Last Lantern Roadhouse, Walter said. I looked up what it's worth. The envelope has the numbers. The stake would be valued against sweat equity which you have put in for 3 years without ever asking for more than your wage, and against the specific value of what you contributed to the events of the past 2 weeks, which is not something I can calculate precisely, but which I can tell you is not small. Logan didn't pick up the envelope. Walter, he said. Hear me out, Walter said. I'm not doing this out of gratitude. I've been grateful to you for 3 years. And I haven't offered you a stake because gratitude isn't a business reason. I'm doing this because you are the most competent person I have ever had behind that bar. Because the people who come in here trust you in a way that is not transferable. And because he paused, and something in his face did what faces do when a man in his 70s says the true thing instead of the easier adjacent thing. Because I am old enough to know that good things require people who intend to stay. And I believe you intend to stay. My past, Logan started. Your past, Walter said, with the firmness of a man cutting something off cleanly, did not save this roadhouse. Your choices saved this roadhouse. The past was the material. The choices were the man. He pushed the envelope another inch. Open it. Logan opened it. He read the numbers. He read the proposed terms. He read the one paragraph at the bottom that Walter had clearly written himself, not through a lawyer, because it sounded exactly like Walter direct and undecorated, and more honest than most legal documents manage to be. He set the papers on the bar. I'll need a week to think about it, Logan said. Take 2, Walter said. But Logan, yes, don't use the time to talk yourself out of it. Use it to get comfortable with the idea that something good is allowed to happen to you. Logan looked at the papers, at Walter, at the roadhouse around them, the vinyl booths and the taps and the hand-painted sign that was still not quite level after 2 paintings. I'll try, he said. The Wednesday after the Saturday that changed everything, Marta drove to the Last Lantern and sat down at the counter and ordered coffee and eggs and ate them in the particular, deliberate way of someone who is going to say something important and is eat their eggs first because they've decided. The important thing can wait until the eggs are done. When she finished, she set her fork down and looked at Logan and said, I want to tell you something that I haven't told anyone yet. All right, Logan said. When Gavin's people first came to my counter, the very first visit, Before any payment, before any of it, they sat in the booth in the corner and they told me what would happen if I didn't cooperate. And I sat there and I smiled and I said I'd think about it. And after they left, she stopped, looked at her coffee, looked back up. After they left, I went into my kitchen and I sat on an overturned milk crate and she chose the word carefully. I was paralyzed. For almost 20 minutes, I couldn't move because I was so afraid and I had nobody to tell. Logan didn't say anything. I want you to understand that, Marta said. Because when people hear what we did, the records, the documents, the evidence, they're going to think of us as brave. And we were by the end. But in the middle of it, I was a woman sitting on a milk crate in my own kitchen, unable to move, because I was alone with something I didn't know how to carry. She held his eyes. And then Rachel came in and asked me a question. And the question wasn't brave-making or inspiring. It was just someone else being there, someone who already suspected the shape of it and came to ask if I'd seen the same shape. She paused. That's what made the difference. Not courage, company. Logan nodded slowly. Yes, he said. I want you to know I'm going to tell that story, Marta said. Not the version where we were all heroes. The version where we were terrified and someone showed up and we stopped being alone. She picked up her coffee because I think that's the useful version. The heroic version teaches people that being brave is for brave people. The real version teaches people that being afraid is normal and the only cure for it is that someone comes and sits down across from you. Logan looked at her. Marta, he said. Don't compliment me, she said. I didn't come here for that. I know, he said. I was going to say you should tell it exactly the way you just told it to me. Because you're right. That's the version that reaches people. She finished her coffee. She stood up. She put a 20 on the counter. Keep the change, she said. And tell Walter that was the best egg breakfast in the county. She picked up her bag. I'm going back to open my lunch counter, which is going to be open today and tomorrow and every day for the next 20 years, because no man with a briefcase and a pleasant voice is going to tell me otherwise. She walked out. Logan looked at the 20 on the counter. He thought about what Shide said about the milk crate and the 20 minutes and the company that had made the difference. He thought about Isaac saying, tell me where you need us, on a phone call. 8 years of silence hadn't broken. He thought about Rachel at the kitchen table for 4 nights with cold coffee and a pen, building something that would protect people she'd never met on highways she'd never driven. He thought about what he'd told Gavin on that last night, that the people of this highway had built the thing that stopped him, that Logan had just held the space open while they did it. He had meant it when he said it. But standing here now, in the ordinary Tuesday morning of a roadhouse that was still standing and would keep standing, he understood it more completely than he had in the parking lot. He had held the space open. That was real. But it wasn't separate from what the others had built. It was part of the same structure, a different piece of the same thing. The space was nothing without what was built inside it, and what was built inside it meant nothing without a space to build in. That was the lesson Danny had never gotten to learn. That was the lesson Logan had spent 8 years learning alone, and was only now finally learning in company. The phone rang on Thursday evening, just before the dinner rush. Logan picked up behind the bar. Logan Rourke? The voice was professional, a woman's, measured and direct. My name is Corinna Vasquez. I'm the director of Pathways Forward, the nonprofit in Tucson that sent you a letter earlier this week. I got the letter, Logan said. I wanted to call rather than wait, she said, because I've been in this work for 17 years and I have a fairly well-calibrated sense of when something is worth pursuing quickly versus when it can wait. And everything I've learned about what happened on Highway 89 last Saturday, from the Tribune piece, and from my own conversations with people involved, suggests to me that the approach you took is worth pursuing quickly. I need to be clear about something, Logan said. Please, I'm not a trainer. I don't have a curriculum. What I did last week is not something I designed. It's something I spent 20 years learning and then applied to a specific situation that I knew fairly well. That's exactly what I want to talk about, Vasquez said. Because in my experience, the most valuable things are never the design curricula. They're the accumulated judgment of people who have done something real in the actual world and can articulate what they learned from it. She paused. Can you articulate it? Logan looked at the bar, at the last lantern around him, at Walter coming through the kitchen door, at Rachel, at the register, at the first of the dinner customers pushing through the front door. I can try, he said. That's all I'm asking, Vasquez said. Will you come to Tucson? Not to commit to anything, just to talk. Logan was quiet for a moment. He thought about the letter from the nonprofit. He thought about the things Marta had said about the version of the story that was useful versus the version that was just heroic. He thought about the young men he'd watched over 20 years make the same desperate moves from the same desperate places and land in the same desperate ends. Not because they were unredeemable, but because nobody had ever shown them that the only exit from that cycle was lateral sideways into a life that looked different, not forward into a version of the same life that was somehow supposed to go better. He thought about what he'd told Rachel when she asked if becoming visible had changed anything for him. Not the way I thought it would. I'll come to Tucson, he said. Next week, if that works. Next week is perfect, Vasquez said. Thank you, Mr. Rourke. He put the phone down. He looked at the dinner crowd filling in the families and the truckers and the regulars settling into their usual booths with the ease of people who have always done this, who have eaten in this room for years and expect to eat in it for years more, who carry the continuity of the place in their bodies, the way you carry a rhythm you've heard, often enough that you don't hear it anymore. You just find yourself moving to it. Walter appeared at his elbow. Phone business, he said. The nonprofit in Tucson, Logan said. I'm going to meet with them next week. Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're going to say yes to them. I don't know yet. You're going to say yes, Walter said, because it's the kind of thing that doesn't stop making sense the more you look at it. Logan looked at him. You read the letter. Rachel showed me, Walter said, without apology. She was worried you'd overthink it. I might still overthink it. That's all right, Walter said, moving toward the service end of the bar to take a drink order. You've got time now. Nobody's in a hurry around here. He paused, looked back, except the table in the far booth, who've been waiting 7 minutes and are going to want the brisket special and a pitcher of iced tea. Logan reached for the order pad. He took the order. He called it back to the kitchen. He refilled the coffee at the counter and cleared 2 tables from the dinner surge and answered a question about whether the kitchen was still doing the green child tonight. It was, and he did all of it with the same unhurried competence he'd brought to every shift for 3 years. But something had shifted in the doing of it. Not in the work itself, but in the quality of his presence inside it. Something more settled, more entirely there, less like a man keeping himself busy enough not to think, and more like a man who had thought what needed thinking and arrived at something he could live in. He was still behind the bar when Ernesto Reyes came in at 8:30, not to eat, just to sit at the counter and drink a beer and watch the room with the satisfied expression of a man who has survived something and is presently enjoying the simple fact of survival. He nodded at Logan. Logan nodded back. Neither of them said anything for several minutes. Then Ernesto said, My brother wants to stay. Good, Logan said. He says it's because of the article. That people have been coming off the highway specifically to stop at our place since Tuesday. Ernesto turned the beer bottle in his hands. He says business is up 40% in 3 days. That'll level out, Logan said. I know. But while it lasts, Ernesto almost smiled. While it lasts, my brother's the one who doesn't want to sell. That's new. People can change their minds when the weight changes, Logan said. Ernesto looked at him. Is that what happened with you? Logan thought about it. Something like that, he said. The letter from the nonprofit, Ernesto said. Rachel told me. Rachel tells everyone everything, Logan said, but without heat. She told me because she wanted someone else to encourage you, Ernesto said. She said you were the kind of man who doesn't convince himself. You need someone to sit across from you and say the thing out loud. He held Logan's eyes. So I'm sitting here and I'm saying, do it. Because whatever you did last week, the way you thought about it, the way you moved through it, without ever being the loudest person in the room, That is something that should not stay in one roadhouse in northern Arizona. He set the bottle down. That should go places. Logan looked at him, at Ernesto Reyes, who had spent 2 months writing notes in the margins of his own invoices and didn't know why until someone finally asked the right question. Who had driven to the Last Lantern with a folder he'd kept out of instinct and a faith that it would someday be worth keeping. Your father's saying, Logan said. The one about people who own nothing but decide they own each other. He said it in Spanish, Ernesto said. Sounds better in Spanish. It sounds pretty good in English, Logan said. Ernesto finished his beer. He put cash on the counter and stood up and put on his jacket. He said, You're going to say yes to the nonprofit. Everyone keeps telling me what I'm going to do, Logan said. Because it's obvious to everyone but you, Ernesto said. Good night, Logan. Good night, Ernesto. He watched Ernesto walk out. He watched the door close behind him. He watched the room buzzy, warm, the ordinary good noise of people being fed and rested. And he thought about the letter in Walter's envelope and Vasquez's voice on the phone and the 20% stake in a roadhouse that was still standing because 7 people had decided to stop being afraid in isolation. And he thought about the room behind the kitchen where he'd slept on a narrow cot for 3 years looking at 3 photographs he'd never shown anyone. He would say yes to the nonprofit. He knew that. He'd known it since he read the letter. He just needed the time he'd asked for, not to decide, but to let the decision settle into him properly, the way anything real has to settle before you can carry it without dropping it. He picked up the order pad for the next table. He went back to work. He said yes to Corinna Vasquez on a Monday morning, standing behind the bar with a cup of coffee, and the particular clarity that comes when a decision you've been circling finally lands and you stop circling. He said it simply, without conditions or extended negotiation, because the conditions he'd wanted to set had dissolved during the week he'd used not to decide but to settle, and what remained when the settling was done was just the plain fact of a thing that needed doing and a person who could do it. Vasquez said, Good, we'll start slow. 1 session, 6 participants. You talk about what you know and we see what sticks. 1 session, Logan said. And then we'll see, she said. He drove to Tucson on a Wednesday with the windows down, the desert air moving through the truck the way it does on open highway when you're going somewhere with a fixed destination and you're not running from anything. 3 hours each way. He came back that evening and sat at the bar after close, and Walter put 2 glasses on the counter and filled them without asking, and said, Well, 6 young men, Logan said, average age 24. 4 of them were in or adjacent to situations that looked like what I spent 20 years in. 2 of them were veterans who'd come back from service and hadn't found a way to put the service down. He turned the glass. I talked for 2 hours. I told them about Danny. I told them about the Roadhouse. I told them what it costs to be the loudest person in every room and what it's worth when you figure out that you don't have to be. He paused. One of them asked me a question I didn't expect. What question? Walter said. He asked how you know when you're done paying for the things you did wrong. Logan looked at the glass, and I said, I don't think you ever stop paying. But at some point, the payment stops being punishment and starts being purpose. And that's when you know you're moving in the right direction. Walter was quiet. Did that help him? He said. I don't know yet, Logan said. But he wrote it down. That's something. 6 months moved the way time moves when it's full fast from the outside, detailed from the inside, the kind of passage that you only fully appreciate when you look back and see how much ground has been covered. The Last Lantern Roadhouse did not transform overnight, the way things do in stories that prefer the dramatic version to the true one. It changed the way real things change, gradually, through accumulated small decisions, each one less visible than the last. Rachel finished her accounting qualification in February on a Thursday night in Prescott and came back to the Last Lantern, still in her good clothes, and sat at the bar and said to Logan, That's done. With the quiet satisfaction of someone who has completed something, they began under difficult circumstances and did not allow the circumstances to stop them. She poured herself a glass of good wine from the bottle Walter had been saving and she drank it without ceremony and went to bed in the room upstairs that had once been a storage room, and that she'd slowly, over a year, converted into something more livable. The bookkeeping cooperative came next. She called it Highway Ledger Practical. Direct, no elaboration needed. And in its first 3 months, it served 9 businesses along the Highway 89 corridor, providing monthly financial reviews, documentation training, and what Rachel described to her first clients as the kind of records that make you invisible to people who rely on your silence and visible to people who can help you. Marta was her first client. Ernesto was her second. Dave Harmon called her on a Tuesday in January, before the cooperative officially launched, and said, "When you start taking clients, Linda and I want to be on the list." Rachel said they were already on it. She'd put them on it the day she decided to start it. The Emergency Assistance Fund that Walters established a small pool of money drawn from Roadhouse profits, contributions from the businesses that had been part of what happened on that Saturday, and 3 anonymous donations that Rachel suspected came from Isaac Boone's organization, but did not confirm, because some things are worth accepting gracefully without examination. The fund made its first disbursement in December to a family run diner 30 miles south that had been hit by a kitchen fire in November and was 2 months from closing if they couldn't cover the repairs. The diner reopened in January. The owners drove to the Last Lantern on the day they opened and handed Walter a card that all 3 of their children had signed and said almost nothing else, because almost nothing else was needed. Walter pinned the card above the bar. Logan's workshop started the same way most things that last start accidentally, or close enough to accidentally that the intention didn't announce itself until it was already underway. In November, a man showed up at the back door on a Tuesday afternoon. He was 26, broad-shouldered, with the particular quality of exhaustion that is not physical, but carried the weight of someone who has been doing the wrong thing long enough that the wrong thing no longer feels optional. He knocked twice and stood back from the door in a way that was careful. That said, he understood he was asking something and was prepared to be told no. Logan opened the door. The man said his name was Cody. He said he'd heard about the Last Lantern from someone who'd heard about it from someone else, and he was looking for work if there was any. He said he was good with engines, and he'd done shop work before, but the shop had closed and he was between situations. Between situations was the particular phrasing of a person who was leaving several things unsaid. Logan looked at him for a moment, at the exhaustion, at the careful way he'd positioned himself, at the hands that were used to mechanical work and were currently not quite still at his sides. "You eat?" Logan said. "Not today," Cody said. "Come in," Logan said. He fed Cody before he asked a single question about his circumstances. He'd learned that from 20 years on the road and 3 years behind a bar, you don't get the truth from a hungry person. You get the desperation that shapes what the truth sounds like when there's not enough in the body to hold it steady. When Cody had eaten Walter's brisket, a full plate, 2 rolls, a glass of milk that he drank without self-consciousness in a way that suggested milk was something he hadn't had in a while, Logan sat across from him and said, "What are you actually dealing with?" Cody told him. It took 20 minutes, and it was not a simple story, and it was not a story without fault on Cody's part, and Cody did not present it as one. He had been in a situation, a crew, a loose criminal affiliation, not organized in the way Morano's operation was organized, but the same general territory for 3 years. And he'd gotten out of it 8 months ago, after a close friend had not gotten out of it, and the getting out had left him with nothing in the specific way that leaving a thing completely leaves you with nothing, because everything you owned had been part of the thing you left. Logan listened. He asked 2 questions during the telling, both of which were about mechanics about the engines. Cody said he could work on the specific type, what he knew how to diagnose. At the end of it, Cody said, "I know this sounds like, I know you've probably heard versions of this before." "I have," Logan said. "That doesn't make yours less true." Cody looked at him. "Are you going to help me?" "I'm going to tell you what I have," Logan said. "I have a workshop behind this bar that needs organizing. I have 2 bikes that need service work. I have a small operating budget for legitimate labor that Walter set aside because he had a feeling someone would come along who needed it. He looked at Cody. I have none of that to waste. And I have no patience for someone who is here looking for an easier version of the situation they're trying to leave. I'm not looking for easier, Cody said. Good, Logan said. Come back tomorrow at 7. Bring whatever tools you have. Cody came back at 6:45. By March, the workshop had 3 regulars. Cody, who turned out to be as good with engines as he'd claimed and better with electrical systems than he'd mentioned. A former rider named Britt, who'd heard about Logan from Isaac's network and driven 4 hours from New Mexico because she was 2 years out of a situation she described with precise brevity as the kind that leaves marks you can't see in a mirror, and a 22-year-old named Marcus, who had been referred by Pathways Forward in Tucson, Vasquez's organization, and who walked into the workshop on his first day with the expression of someone who has been told this is a good opportunity and is reserving judgment. Marcus reserved judgment for exactly 11 days. On the 12th day, Logan handed him a fuel system diagnostic problem on one of the bikes and gave him the tools and walked away. 2 hours later, Marcus came to find Logan and said, I found the fault. Show me, Logan said. Marcus showed him. The diagnosis was correct. More than correct. Marcus had identified not just the primary fault, but a secondary issue that Logan had deliberately left unflagged to see whether Marcus would find it. Logan looked at the repair. He looked at Marcus. How did you know to look at the secondary line, he said. Because if the primary was failing that way, the stress would have been redistributing somewhere, Marcus said. And the only place with enough flexibility to absorb it without showing immediate symptoms would be the secondary. It was just he paused. It was just following the logic. That's diagnostics, Logan said. Yeah, Marcus said. Is it always that? He seemed to be searching for a word and unable to find the right one among the ones he knew. Satisfying, Logan said. I was going to say logical, Marcus said. But yeah, both. Yes, Logan said. When you do it right, it's both. Marcus came back every day after that without being asked. He came back on days the workshop wasn't scheduled because he'd thought of something he wanted to try. He came back on a Saturday morning and fixed a problem on Cody's personal bike that Cody had been working around for 2 months, and then went back to whatever he'd been working on before without mentioning it, and Cody found it and stood looking at it for a moment before going to find Marcus and saying simply, thank you. Wasn't hard, Marcus said. It was for me, Cody said. Marcus looked at him. At 22, with everything he hadn't yet figured out about himself still ahead of him, he looked at a man 5 years older who had just admitted something small and specific and completely true, and he said, then show me what stopped you, because that's the part I might learn something from. Logan, standing in the doorway between the workshop and the kitchen, heard that and went back to what he was doing without interrupting it. The twist that nobody had predicted. The development that changed the scope of everything they'd built from local to something considerably larger came on a Friday morning in April through a phone call that Logan took standing behind the bar during the pre-lunch quiet. It was Valdez. The trial dates are set, Valdez said. Morano and 6 co-defendants. Federal prosecution with state charges concurrent. The cargo theft component alone puts the scope at $47 million in stolen freight over a 3-year period. $47 million, Logan said. The corridor operation was one piece. Your documentation opened the thread that unraveled the whole thing. The feds have been following it for 4 months, and what they've found. Valdez paused in the specific way of a man who has spent 14 months on something and is only now beginning to see its full dimension. The staging network ran through 6 states. 19 businesses used as laundering shells, most of them exactly like the ones on your highway small, isolated family-run operations that Morano's people identified as ideal because their cash-heavy model made unusual deposits hard to flag. 19 businesses, Logan said, of which 7 have been able to provide documentation sufficient for prosecution, primarily because of the template Rachel built, Valdez said. Her methodology, the way she structured the evidence to simultaneously establish coercion and document the laundering. It's now the approach the Federal Financial Crimes Unit is using for the other 12. Logan was very still behind the bar. Valdez, he said. I know, Valdez said. Logan, what you people built in that Roadhouse kitchen is going to put away a man who has been operating in 6 states for 3 years and who our office has not been able to touch for 14 months. And it's going to do it because a young woman stayed up for 4 nights and understood that protecting people from criminal liability was as important as building the criminal case. Rachel was at the register. She was looking at him because she could hear enough of his tone to know the call was significant. Logan said, "I'm going to put you on speaker." He put Valdez on speaker. He said, "Tell Rachel." Valdez told Rachel. She sat with it for a full 30 seconds, which for Rachel was an eternity. She was a person who processed fast, who moved from information to implication to action in the time it took most people to finish absorbing the information. 30 seconds meant the information was larger than her usual processing speed. Then she said 19 businesses. 19, Valdez said, and 12 of them are using my methodology. Your methodology, adapted by the Federal Financial Crimes Unit into a standardized approach. Rachel looked at Logan. He looked back. In the look between them was everything that had happened since the night Gavin walked in and shattered the ceramic rooster. Walter kept his tips, in all of it compressed into a single shared recognition. The businesses that couldn't document in time, Rachel said. The 12. Are they being protected as victims or treated as subjects? Victims, Valdez said immediately. Across the board. Your coercion timeline framework made that argument for all 19 simultaneously. The sequence you established, first contact, first payment, first sign of financial irregularity, it's identical in every case. The pattern proves the coercion. The lawyers have it in writing. Good, Rachel said. Her voice was steady. That was the most important part. I know, Valdez said. The prosecutors know. It's in the brief. After the call ended, Logan and Rachel sat in the quiet pre-lunch Roadhouse and looked at the bar between them. Rachel said, 19 families. 19 businesses, Logan said, which means more than 19 families. She stopped. Started again. That's not what I thought we were building. No, Logan said. I thought we were saving the last lantern. We were, Logan said. It just turned out that saving the last lantern was connected to things we couldn't see from inside it. Rachel was quiet. Then she said, Danny would have, and stopped. Logan looked at her. I've heard you say his name, she said quietly. You don't talk about him. But sometimes when something matters, I hear you say it under your breath. She held his eyes. Would he have understood this? What you built here? Logan thought about Danny on the highway outside Albuquerque. Danny, who had gone in because he trusted Logan's judgment, and Logan's judgment had been fractionally, fatally wrong. Danny, who had been the best of what the road could produce, loyal and clear-eyed and completely unafraid, and who had deserved a better ending than the one the fraction gave him. He would have said, Logan said slowly, that this is what the road was always supposed to be for, and that it took me long enough to figure it out. He paused. And then he would have asked if there was any coffee left. Rachel almost smiled. There's always coffee left. Yeah, Logan said. There is. The evening that the cameras arrived, the shared surveillance network that the 12 corridor businesses installed simultaneously on a Thursday in May, connected through a cooperative monitoring system that Rachel had helped design and that a local tech firm had donated installation labor for. After reading the Tribune piece, Walter stood at the bar and looked at the small monitor mounted near the register that showed the last lantern's parking lot in clean, well-lit detail, and he said, Irene would have found this excessive. Would she? Logan said. She would have said, if someone's going to cause trouble, you deal with it when it arrives. Walter looked at the monitor, and then she would have made sure the camera was aimed at exactly the right angle and memorized how to check the recording. He almost smiled. She was a very practical woman. She built this place, Logan said. We built it, Walter said. That's what I keep. He stopped. Started again. Differently. That's what I keep understanding more and more clearly. Not that I built it or she built it. We built it. And then you came along, and Rachel was already here, and now there are 9 businesses with cooperative bookkeeping and 12 with shared cameras and an emergency fund that helped a family diner reopen in January. He looked at the monitor, At some point, a thing stops being what you built and starts being what keeps building. Logan looked at him. Walter, he said. Yes. I'm going to accept the stake. Walter's expression didn't change dramatically. It did something smaller and more genuine, a slight easing around the eyes. The specific look of a man whose instinct has been confirmed rather than surprised. I know, Walter said. I've known since Tuesday. Tuesday was 4 days ago. You've been building up to it for 4 days, Walter said. A man who's going to say no doesn't reorganize the storage room and fix the third tap and repaint the back step. He reached under the bar. Sit down. Logan sat down. Walter produced the envelope, the same one, worn further at the corners now, and set it on the bar, and produced a pen and sat on his own stool, and the two of them finalized, in the practical and legally imperfect way that people finalize things in bars late in the evening, a partnership that had been operating in fact for 3 years without a name. Walter signed his half. Logan signed his. Walter put the papers back in the envelope and said, I'll have Rachel formalize it in the morning. She'll want to adjust the valuation, Logan said. She always does, Walter said. Let her. The young man came in on a Tuesday evening in June. He came in the way people come in when they're not sure whether they should have come in, pushing the door open slowly, looking at the room before stepping fully into it, the particular caution of someone who is doing something that feels important and is not sure they've earned the right to do it yet. He was 23, maybe 24, with a good face that had recently been through something that left its mark on good faces. He sat at the counter, not a booth, the counter, which is where people sit when they want to be near another person without being directly across from them, and looked at the menu without reading it. Logan set a glass of water in front of him without asking. The young man looked up. Thank you, he said. You want coffee? Logan said. Please. Logan poured it, set it down, moved to the other end of the counter for a moment, giving the young man space to exist without being observed, and then moved back naturally when a minute had passed. Are you looking for something to eat? Logan said. The young man stopped, looked at the counter, looked back up. I was told this place might need help. I'm good at kitchen work. I can do whatever. I can clean. I can carry. He stopped again. I need work. I'm not going to pretend I'm not here because I need work. That's honest, Logan said. The guy who told me to come, he said honesty was the thing here. That if I came and tried to look like I was fine, the man behind the bar would see through it anyway. Who told you that? Logan said. Guy named Cody, the young man said. He's in your workshop. Logan looked at him. At the face that had been through something, and the hands that had worked before and wanted to work again, and the particular quality of someone who has arrived at a place they weren't sure they deserved to arrive at and is waiting to find out whether the arrival is going to hold. He looked, and he saw what he'd seen 8 years ago in his own mirror and then spent 8 years looking away from, and he saw what he'd been looking at across the bar for 6 months in Cody, in Britt, in Marcus, the specific exhaustion of someone whose worst chapter is behind them and who has not yet been shown what the next one looks like. What's your name? Logan said. Tyler, the young man said. Tyler. Logan set the coffee pot down. Are you ready to build something? Tyler looked at him. The question wasn't what he'd expected. Not what can you do, or have you worked in kitchens before, or any of the practical questions a person asks when they're evaluating a hire. He looked at Logan with the expression of someone trying to decide whether the question is a test or whether it means what it sounds like it means. I don't know what that looks like, Tyler said. I haven't had a lot of practice with building things. That's all right, Logan said. Neither did I when I started. When did you start? Logan thought about that. He thought about a narrow cot in a room behind a kitchen and 3 photographs pinned to the wall above it and 3 years of careful, deliberate smallness that had turned out to be, in retrospect, less like hiding and more like waiting. Waiting for the thing that needed doing to arrive. He thought about a ceramic rooster full of tip money shattered on a barroom floor. He thought about Rachel's hands on an accountant's ledger at 3 a.m, building something that would travel to 6 states and protect 19 families. He thought about Isaac saying, Tell me where you need us across 8 years of silence. He thought about Danny turning on a highway to check that Logan was still there. He was still there. He was going to keep being there. I started, Logan said, the night someone walked into this bar and made me understand that staying small was not the same as staying safe, and that the things I'd learned were not things I'd learned for myself. He held Tyler's eyes. I started when I understood that what I knew how to do was protect people, not from danger, from the isolation that makes danger permanent. Tyler looked at him for a long moment. Can you teach me that? He said. I can teach you the parts that can be taught, Logan said. The rest you'll figure out when you need it. How will I know when I need it? You'll know, Logan said, because someone in front of you will need it first, and you'll realize you have it. Tyler picked up his coffee. He held it in both hands, not drinking it yet, just holding it, the way you hold something when you're not sure how permanent the moment is and you want to slow it down slightly. Okay, he said. Okay. Okay, Logan said. Come back tomorrow at 7. I'll have Cody show you the workshop. What should I bring? Whatever tools you have, Logan said, and whatever questions you've been afraid to ask. Tyler nodded. He drank his coffee. He sat at the counter for another 20 minutes, not saying much, not needing to, just sitting in the warm, ordinary noise of the Roadhouse, absorbing the room the way a person absorbs a place they might be allowed to belong to, testing the feeling of it against the fear that it might be taken away, finding slowly that the fear was smaller than the feeling. He left at 8:15. He said goodnight. He came back the next morning at 6:50. Logan was behind the bar the night the last of the trial coverage ran on the regional news. Morano, convicted on 11 federal counts. Gavin, convicted on 7. The network of cargo theft and extortion and money laundering across 6 states dismantled, documented, prosecuted with evidence built in part from a Roadhouse kitchen in northern Arizona by people who had decided that being afraid together was better than being afraid alone. The news ran on the small television Walter kept above the far end of the bar, and the regulars watched it with the particular satisfaction of people who have a personal relationship to something that is now being described as news. Marta was there. She'd driven up for dinner and stayed for the broadcast. She watched the conviction coverage with her arms crossed and her expression composed in the specific way of a woman who has been right about something for a long time and is experiencing the public confirmation of it with dignified restraint. Ernesto was there with his brother, the brother who no longer wanted to sell, who had driven up from the truck stop specifically because Ernesto said this was a night worth being present for. Dave Harmon was there with Linda, who sat in a booth near the window and watched the coverage and didn't say much, who had spent 4 months photographing license plates in her own parking lot and was now watching the consequences of that patience play out on a television screen above a bar. Walter watched from his stool. Rach watched from the register, her ledger open but her eyes on the screen. Cody and Marcus were in the workshop but had left the connecting door open, and Logan could hear them stop working when the verdict portion came on. Logan watched from behind the bar. When it was done, when the anchor moved on to the next story and the room relaxed back into its ordinary evening noise, Marta unfolded her arms and looked at Logan and said, "If my mother would have liked you." "Because of the records?" Logan said. "Because you understood that the records mattered," Marta said. She always said the problem wasn't that people were cowardly. The problem was that cowards are created by isolation, and bravery is created by company. She said every brave thing she ever saw was really just 2 or more people deciding the same thing at the same time. Logan looked at the room, at Ernesto and his brother, at Dave and Linda, at Marta with her arms unfolded, at Walter on his stool, at Rachel at the register. He looked at the hand-painted sign above the door that was still not quite level after 2 paintings. He looked at the highway through the window long and lit and carrying its traffic through the desert night, the way it had been carrying traffic since before any of them were there and would keep carrying it after. He thought about the thing Walter had said. At some point, a thing stops being what you built and starts being what keeps building. He thought about Danny, not with the weight he'd carried for 8 years, but with something cleaner. The grief still there, because grief does not leave, But the grief no longer blocking the view the way it had, no longer standing between him and everything that came after. Danny was part of what had built him. Danny was part of why he understood what he understood. That was not a debt he could repay. It was a weight he could carry differently, now forward instead of under. He thought about a compass rose with wings, a word too faded to read unless you were close. He thought about what the word had always meant to him. Not direction, not navigation, but the specific act of going back for someone who was lost. He reached under the bar and refilled glasses along the counter without being asked, moving from one to the next with the same unhurried competence that had been his signature for 3 years and would be his signature for the steady, the present competence of a man who had found his place and understood, finally and completely, what his place was for. Not a legend, not a ghost, not a man hiding in plain sight on a desert highway, making himself small enough to avoid the consequences of being known. A man behind a bar in a roadhouse that was still standing, surrounded by people who had decided not to face their fear alone and who had found, in that decision, that the fear could be faced at all. Logan Rourke set the bottle down. He looked at the room. He looked at the highway. He looked at the last lantern's warm light falling across everything it touched, the way it had fallen for 40 years and would fall for 40 more. He was not hiding anymore. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he had been built, broken, rebuilt, and finally made ready to do. And the highway outside carried its people through the dark, and the light inside held steady, and the last lantern roadhouse stood on the edge of Highway 89 and kept every promise its name had ever made.